Guys, are you ready for Michael Knowles to talk about October 7th at the Young America's Foundation? And very specifically for a talk titled The Past, Present, and Future of Holy War. So, buckle yourselves in for some real genocide apologia, because it's about to come thick and heavy. Let's go. Wow, look at all these rebels. You can tell they're rebels because of the guitar. Oh boy.
Very kind. Wow. Well, there we go. Let's go. Is that the first time that's ever been chanted on the Berkeley campus? Amazing. That would have been the last thing I'd expect to hear chanted. But here, we've got the creme de la creme of UC Berkeley in this room. This is good stuff. Well, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here at UC Berkeley. Thank you to all the students for the invitation. Thank you to YAF, as always, for hosting. And thank you to the Logan family for sponsoring this lecture series. Today marks the one-year anniversary of the Hamas-led massacre of Israelis, which killed some 695 Israeli civilians, including 38 children, 71 foreign nationals, and 373 security personnel. Hamas called the terror attack Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, which refers to the Muslim mosque that now sits atop the Temple Mount in Old Jerusalem.
Question, do you really need to specify that it's a Muslim mosque? Are there mosques of other religions? Good night, Ms. Milena. So, like, can you have a Christian mosque? Is that a thing? Because I've never heard of that.
Many people seem confused about the meaning of the October 7th attack. That is especially true on this campus, which hosted not only protests, but a full-on encampment demonstrating against the State of Israel in the months following the attack. The encampment only dispersed after the university administration agreed to consider divestment from the State of Israel. The campus protesters appeared to be confused about two chief questions. They actually are confused about a lot more questions, their gender, what end is up. They have a lot of confusion. But specifically on this issue, they are confused about two chief questions relating to the October 7th attack and its aftermath. First, many of them deny that it's an act of terrorism. This is the simplest error to dispel. On October 7th...
I mean, yeah, it is an act of terrorism. Like, I feel like that's pretty, yeah. Is it an act of resistance against oppression? It is also that. Like, it can be more than one thing. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but like, yeah, it was a terror attack.
2023, Hamas targeted civilians to achieve a political end. That is the most basic definition of terrorism that there is. The civilians were not killed as an unintentional consequence of military action, as happens even in just wars. Rather, they were the intended targets, which is never justified. Contrary to the cynical slogan that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, reasonable people since at least Aristotle and Cicero have been able to distinguish between just and unjust military action.
Sure, but I think Cicero would also maybe not necessarily agree with, like, the Geneva Conventions, for example. Like, what is and is not a justified military attack has been debated since the dawn of time. And so, like, saying that people would uniformly agree over a period of 1,000 years about, like, what is and is not justified, well, yeah, it's a bit of a stretch there, Michael.
The second cause of confusion among the campus intifada concerns those political ends that Hamas hoped to achieve. The campus protesters, who have been miseducated by the increasingly secular, historically illiterate, and philosophically ignorant West, seem to believe that the October 7th attack was primarily about territory, the nationalist aspirations of these supposedly indigenous Palestinian Arabs, whose right to political self-determination, the protesters say, has been denied as a result of the illegitimate establishment of the State of Israel in 1948.
Yeah. It is actively being denied now by the State of Israel. Hamas was funded and propped up for a decade or so prior to this by Benjamin Netanyahu, specifically as controlled opposition, to thwart any attempts at a two-state solution. It was specifically backed in order to create this radical faction that could not moderate into a state government. That was specifically part of the political calculation here.
From the river to the sea, therefore, Palestine will be free. Historically speaking, none of those claims stand up to scrutiny. There has never been a nation-state known as Palestine. Even if there had been, Palestinian Arabs would not be the indigenous heirs to the Levant, which was Byzantine before Muslim Arabs invaded and conquered the land in the 7th century. Now, Jews had lived as a nation in the Levant, eventually becoming incorporated into the Roman Empire until the Jewish-Roman wars of the 1st and 2nd centuries. That is a deeper historical tie than the Muslim Arabs can claim.
Okay, so if we're going to play that game, who has a deeper historical tie to the claim of America, Michael? Is it Americans? Is it your Swedish grandma who emigrated? Is it your Italian grandfather, great grandfather who emigrated? No, it's indigenous people, Michael. But something tells me when it comes to the United States, you're going to sing a very different tune. Something about like, but the land was conquered, you see.
But even the Jewish argument from indigeneity falls flat in precisely the same way that all indigenous arguments fall flat. If historical occupation does not persuade modern Americans to give Mount Rushmore to the Lakota Sioux, or to the Cheyenne or the Crow or the Kiowa, from whom the Sioux took the Black Hills of South Dakota, then historical occupation, likewise, does not suffice to claim the Holy Land as a nation-state for the Arabs.
Then likewise it shouldn't suffice for claiming it for Israel either there, Michael.
Or the Byzantines, or the Romans, or the Jews, or the Canaanites, or the Hittites, for that matter. None of whom, by the way, even conceived of the modern nation-state before it appeared in the 17th century.
Though I'm gonna throw this out there, Michael. Something tells me that we're not talking about Hittites in the Middle East at the moment. Like, you're listing off a bunch of groups that currently don't exist anymore because of the march of time. And we do have one or two groups still there, and those two groups being, the Palestinians and the Israelis. So, like, this is all just kind of sidestepping the actual point here, isn't it?
As a way to restore political order to Europe, which had been embroiled in more than a century of war following the Protestant Revolution. The more sophisticated campus protesters make arguments that go deeper than the land and the sea. They will argue that...
that the land and the sea, that Palestine will be free. Like, that's a slogan, Michael. It's not an argument.
Palestinian Muslims must have a nation state in order to protect some vague notion of human rights, which ironically does not exist in the Muslim tradition, but derives from the Western conception of natural rights, which derives from the Christian natural law tradition. This is not
Natural law isn't a Christian tradition, man.
not to say that Christians invented rights.
That is exactly what you were implying, you disingenuous fuck. Michael Knowles is one of the biggest weasels the Daily Wire has on their payroll.
The natural law is written on every human heart. We understand the natural law intuitively, and from first principles, we derive notions of rights.
Yeah, your human rights are just vibes, really.
What is ironic about the leftist protesters' babble about human rights with regard to Arab nationalism in Palestine is that... Yeah, there we are. Maybe the Intifada broke into our audio display. No, we're good. What is ironic about all this babble about human rights with regard to Arab nationalism in Palestine is that the Muslims entirely reject the supposed rights that the leftists exalt.
You know, what's interesting here is that he's not identifying them by their, ethnic group. He's identifying them instead by their religious group, thereby trying to kind of smooth out any potential differences between Palestinian people and Hamas, the organization that is, for all intents and purposes, the only governmental structure in Gaza. So, by using this broader label, he is able to label both civilian and combatant in the same way and hold them both as culpable.
If a queer for Palestine ever actually traveled to Gaza, he would be thrown off of a rooftop.
Sorry, what?
Ever actually that the leftists exalt. If a queer for Palestine ever actually traveled to Gaza, he would be thrown off of a rooftop.
Well, I mean, I think at the moment they'd probably be blown up by a bomb from Israel. I don't think there's a whole lot of time for throwing people off of rooftops right now for anyone in Gaza.
The campus babble about human rights is silly, but it is more sophisticated than the argument about the river and the sea, because it at least approaches the real...
Also, just as an FYI here, one person was critically injured in a stabbing at Miami International Airport, police say. CNN, tell us more. This was back in July. Let's see. The investigation so far indicates the male suspect and victim were on the 4th floor of Terminal J. Without provocation, the subject attacked the victim by stabbing her multiple times and attempted to throw her over the railing. The victim was able to escape the attack and ran down the stairs to the 3rd floor level, which is where the officers found her. Important piece of information about this story, by the way. So, this must have come out right afterwards. So, this is from that event. Surveillance shows trans teen running away after being stabbed 18 times at Miami Airport. Now, let's see. The 17-year-old was sitting on the floor eating when 29-year-old Alexander Love attacked her with a long knife and stabbed her 18 times. Love is also accused of trying to push the teen from the 4th floor. So, you know, I guess even in America, someone who is queer can still be the target of being stabbed multiple times and thrown from the top of a multi-story structure. So it's really not unique, Michael.
Key to the October 7th attack.
Are they okay? Yes, they survived.
Which is religion. Hamas did not name the attack Operation Nation State. It wasn't called Operation Human Rights. They named it after a mosque. And modern Westerners, I'm not just talking...
Yeah, because Hamas is a fundamentalist religious organization. Yeah. Much like you are a Christian fascist, they also incorporate their deeply held religious conviction into their political movement, to the detriment of everyone else.
Talking about the campus intifada at Berkeley or anywhere else, Westerners, including our benighted political elite, don't take the religious motivations for the attack seriously because they no longer take religion seriously.
It's not, but the primary motivations behind the attack are not religious. Like, there is no feasible way in this scenario where Hamas is able to do like any kind of genocidal activity. There's only one side here that is capable of doing that, and it's Israel, and they're doing it.
If they did take religion seriously, if they understood the religious history of their own civilization, they would have known that October 7th was not the first October 7th. Today marks the one-year anniversary of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. It also marks the 453rd anniversary of the Battle of Lepanto, during which Turkish Muslims attempted to conquer Europe. One of the many times Turkish Muslims attempted to conquer Europe.
Okay, but the only reason you are connecting these two things is because, well, they were both they were both Muslim. Like, that's it. That's it. That's the only thing he has. Oh, but by that measure, did you know that there were like 13 Christian invasions of the Middle East? And now to this day, there are still Christian invasions of the Middle East into Afghanistan and Iraq. Wow. That all of those invasions must have happened for exactly the same reasons. You see how this is a flawed reasoning? Like, you see how this is not actually like a point being made? This is like a guy pulling a parlor trick to try and look deep. Also, Real Radham, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, folks.
Having already conquered once Christian lands in the Levant and North Africa, as well as lands in Persia and Mesopotamia and even parts of India in the 7th century, Muslims next set their sights on the Iberian Peninsula, destroying the Christian kingdom there and establishing a Muslim state in present-day Spain and Portugal by the 720s. Within a dozen years of that conquest, Muslim forces had marched through Gaul, that's modern-day France, and they made it to within 150 miles of Paris before they were rebuffed by the Christian leader Charles Martel. Charles the Hammer. It's a real strong name for a real strong guy. Had the Muslims defeated the Christians at the Battle of Tours, Europe today would be Muslim. The way things are going, Europe might end up Muslim anyway, but for very different reasons.
He's saying that because of mass immigration due to wars in the Middle East.
There would be no UC Berkeley, which again, I'm now convincing myself maybe it wouldn't have been the worst, but it would have been bad. It would have been very bad because there would be no universities of any kind.
Are you stupid? Are you stupid? Are you stupid? Who invented universities? Fatima al-Fihri. The founder of universities as we know them today. Are you kidding me? Ah! It was the world's first university. The world's first university was founded in Morocco under the Muslims that lived there. You stupid European-centric fuck. This is why you shouldn't be able to get any kind of history degree without having to study other areas of the world, because when you do get that kind of a degree, I think Michael Knowles has some background in history here. Michael Knowles degrees. Let's see. What did he get a degree in here? I know he has a couple degrees. He went to Yale, got his bachelor's. Yeah, he has a BA in history and Italian from Yale. Okay, but here's the thing, because I know that this is a common... I have a minor in history, not quite the same, but I know it's a very common thing for people to focus on just one area of the world in their studies. And by the way, if you're focusing on Europe for your history degree, you really need to know what the hell is going on in the Middle East in order to fully understand a lot of the stuff that happens in Europe for the sake of your degree. Okay, like just full on, full stop. And one of the things that you need to know about Europe and Greece in particular, and the Muslim empires of the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, is that to a large extent, the people who, like, preserved and passed on knowledge and created educational institutions were the Muslim empires. Like, the only reason we have most of what we know about, like, the Greek Empire and, like, or not Greek empires, but, like, of ancient Greece and, like, the philosophers and the plays, that's because the academics of Islam preserved those things while Europe fell apart following the disintegration of the Roman Empire. So, like, he's literally just incorrect here.
There would be no great cathedrals. There would be no Caravaggio. There would be no Bach.
It's true. There would be no great cathedrals. Except, you know, there would probably still be a lot of really, really big and impressive buildings that, you know, are roughly the same size. You know, like, I don't know. I'm just throwing this one out there. Like, there would still be really pretty buildings, okay? Like, it would be fine. You'd be okay.
There would be no modern science. There would be no Western civilization whatsoever. Curiously, just a little historical footnote, the Nazi armaments minister, Albert Speer, once said that Hitler was actually dismayed when he learned about the Battle of Tours and when he learned about the Muslim loss, because he considered Islam better suited than Christianity for the German spirit. So, you know, that's one endorsement. You probably don't want...
I mean, it's interesting here because when I look up that quote, the quote that I find is not Hitler being dismayed at not being Muslim. Instead, it is Hitler, wrote Speer, viewed Christianity as the wrong religion for the Germanic temperament. Speer wrote that Hitler would say, "You see, it's been our misfortune to have the wrong religion. Why didn't we have the religion of the Japanese, who regard sacrifice for the fatherland as the highest good?" Also, he went on to say the Mohammedan religion, too, would have been much more compatible to us than Christianity. Why did it have to be Christianity with its meekness and flabbiness? Yeah. However, amid his political associates in Berlin, Hitler made harsh pronouncements against the church. Yet, quote, he conceived of the church as an instrument that could be useful to him. Let's take a look again at Albert Speer, the guy that Michael Knowles just quoted. Around 1937, when Hitler heard that at the instigation of the party and the SS, vast numbers of his followers had left the church because it was obstinately opposing his plans, he nevertheless ordered his chief associates, above all Göring and Goebbels, to remain members of the church. He too would remain a member of the Catholic Church, he said, although he had no real attachment to it. And in fact, he remained in the church until his suicide. So, despite his belief that, oh man, it would be better if, for our nation building, if it was, our countrymen were, Muslim or, practiced like ancestor worship or, and it deified a monarch. He remained a member of the Catholic Church, Michael. Seems like a pretty big thing to overlook in your talk, but then again, you are a Christian fascist. You're, a fascist Christian nationalist. There we go. So it's not that surprising.
You don't want him in your column. But anyway, as I was saying, Europe nearly fell to Islam again on October 7th, 1571, at the Battle of Lepanto, when Pope St. Pius V sent Don Juan of Austria and the Holy League to counter the invading Muslims. The Christian naval forces were vastly outnumbered, but they were spiritually well armed. The sailors carried rosaries, and they flew powerful banners on their ships. Pope Pius V had given an image of Christ crucified to Don Juan. Admiral John Andrea Doria flew as his ensign one of 5 copies commissioned of the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which had appeared in Mexico only 40 years prior. This image, believed by many, including me, to be a miraculous image, led to millions of conversions. You might have seen this image recently because President Trump posted it to Truth Social on the feast of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin, and he posted the comment, "Happy birthday, Mary," which is a very, very Trumpy way of acknowledging the day. The Muslim forces, led by Ali Pasha, flew a 16-foot banner of a double-bladed sword. As Father George Rutler has observed, the Christian fleet sailed coincidentally, or providentially, really, in the form of a cross. The Muslim forces sailed as a crescent. After 5 hours of bloody battle, during which the wind suddenly changed course, 180 degrees, started blowing to favor the Christian fleet, the cross defeated the crescent. Without the Christian victory on October 7th, which Christians have celebrated for 4.5 centuries as the Feast of Our Lady of Victory and the Holy Rosary, the West would no longer exist. Turkish Muslims again tried to conquer Europe in 1683 at the Battle of Vienna. The Christian forces, led by Jan Sobieski, were out.
By the way, this happens often in naval battles throughout history where, the wind will change mid-battle because, you're doing a multi-hours long battle and wind doesn't just generally blow in one direction for several hours. And but this happens all over the world, and the victors, the people who win as a result of the wind changing, often attribute their victory to like divine intervention. So like this, again, not that exceptional.
Outnumbered by more than 10 to 1 by the invading Ottoman forces. And yet, on September 12th, 1683, the Christian forces won that battle that had begun in earnest the day before, after mounting the largest cavalry charge in history. The victory was so improbable, 10 to 1, that Sobieski rewrote the words of Julius Caesar. Caesar famously said, "Veni, vidi, vici."
Why does his first name have to be my dead name? Keep looking around the factory thinking I was called. From Caracal.
Oh, Caracal, I'm sorry. But thank you for the $5 super chat. I really appreciate it.
Or if the pedantic classicists are to be believed, he said, "Weni, widi, wiki," which I think is ridiculous, but that's what he said. Sobieski changed it. He said, "Venimus," no, it's not the stupid classical way. He said, "Venimus, vidimus, Deus vincit." We came, we saw, God wins. The victory at Vienna was not only improbable, but decisive.
Yeah, also, it's not so much that God wins, it's mostly that you guys get to, keep and expand your feudal territories. It's less to the God goes the glory and more like, heck yeah, we have more lands to pillage. Huzzah.
For the foreseeable future, though not forever, Islam would have to give up its dream of conquering Europe. That victory reverberated, that very battle reverberated some 341 years later, when Islamic terrorists chose September 11th to attack the United States, the leading nation of the West, and at that time, the totally unchallenged global hegemon. Now I know, we're broadcasting this on YouTube, so I know it has become fashionable in certain quarters to deny that the people who called for, confessed to, and even boasted about committing the September 11th attacks did in fact commit them. But for the purposes of this discussion, it actually doesn't even matter that they did. The fact that Muslim militant groups, and even many Muslim civilians, celebrated the attacks, which stood to bring them no material gain.
Yeah, this entire speech is basically white supremacist Nazi wank. That's all this is in a nutshell. Like, oh, did the people who've been heavily, affected by U.S. imperialism for the past century and had their democratically elected leaders assassinated or their entire country and homeland be fucked with by the U.S., either in direct or indirect invasion, they celebrated when they saw something bad happen to to us? Wow, I can't even begin to wrap my head around that. Yeah, history has, organizations and states that commit heinous acts, and typically the people on the receiving end of those heinous acts aren't too upset when misfortune befalls their oppressor. I'm not surprised about this. That's not really a testament to them being evil. The same way, if a nuclear bomb misfired underground in North Korea and misfortune happened there as a result, I don't know that, a lot of Americans would feel a ton of remorse about that, I still remember the day that, we sent in SEAL Team 6 and the United States got Osama bin Laden. I remember that day, and I remember thinking how ghoulish it was that there were people gathering outside of the White House to dance and celebrate the fact that we killed this guy. And it's yeah, it's not a unique trait to Muslim people to celebrate something bad happening to someone you perceive as an adversary.
And in fact, significant material impoverishment and death suffices to prove my point, which is that Muslims rightly understand these conflicts. September 11th, October 7th, the original October 7th, Tours, Lepanto.
No, you're the one doing like red yarn Pepe Sylvia shit right now. You're like, yes, the Muslims of today are attacking the West because of what happened 400 years ago in Tours, in France. And it's like, no, bud. No. Stop. This is some Pepe Sylvia shit.
Vienna and so on, primarily as conflict.
And like, I mean that even in the sense of like, yeah, history has effects. Like, obviously, like what happened at Tours like affected European history, but it's not like it is the direct causal link, or like the idea of Tours is on the minds of the people like doing this. But like, if Michael Knowles really wants to dig into the nitty gritty here, then like one only has to point at him and laugh for saying that the world wouldn't have universities if not for Europe. That if Muslims had won in Tours, that there would be no more universities, despite the fact that they invented the university 800 years prior to that battle.
Conflicts of religion. The increasingly secular West refuses to believe it. Many in our liberal establishment, following Karl Marx, believe that all of history ultimately comes down to economic factors. They believe that events such as September 11th or October 7th occurred primarily because terrorists don't have enough money. This thesis falls apart.
It's not because terrorists don't have enough money. It's because the Israeli government deliberately propped up Hamas and pushed out or assassinated leaders of any other like political groups that might have been able to oppose them for like 15, 20 years. And the people there have been trapped under Hamas's thumb ever since. And if, God forbid, I say sarcastically, Israel ever decided to stop putting its thumb on the scale here and like actually allow like the UN in to like hold overseen elections, like or some third party to oversee the fairness of elections, like we could turn things around. It's not inevitable that this happens unless you just sit back and do nothing, in which case violent outbursts are inevitable. Israel knew this, by the way. Israel's military leadership knew that keeping people in the inhumane conditions in Gaza was not going to be tenable forever, and that attacks like what happened on October 7th would be the inevitable result. There are reports from inside Israel from years ago indicating that something like this would happen eventually, and lo and behold, it did. And Benjamin Netanyahu has bragged about keeping those conditions in place to forestall any kind of two-state solution. Because again, this is not a circumstance that is the product of only one group of people.
Pretty quickly, when one discovers that Osama bin Laden came
Yes, TJ Durza, it's basically a gigantic effort to manufacture consent for the current genocide.
One of the wealthiest families on earth. Osama personally inherited $25 to $30 million of his family's multi-billion dollar fortune. The man did not suffer for lack of cash. As the economic explanation flops,
the economic explanation absolutely continues to be valid. It's why Israel controlled the economic prosperity of Hamas for decades.
Secular elites concoct ever more fanciful theories. In 2015, Barack Obama and Bill Nye the Science Guy, both of those experts, blamed global warming for Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, you can actually pretty easily see the connection there, Michael, if you think about it for like 5 seconds. Gee whiz. Hey guys, let's take a short mental journey together, okay? Now, imagine you live on a planet and there is a special gas that is emitted by all living things on the planet. Let's call this gas warm gas. So, all these creatures are breathing out this warm gas, and then one of those creatures finds that, the bones and the insides of old creatures could actually be burned, creating a lot of warm gas, but also a lot of, productive things. So they start burning the warming gas, which goes up into the atmosphere. And over time, more and more of that stuff that was underground gets burnt up into warm gas. So there's more warm gas over the planet. Now, this has the effect of warming the average temperature of the planet. Hence the name warm gas. I know it's very technical, but now follow me if you will. Imagine that some places on this planet are hotter than others, and that leads to the creation of deserts. Now imagine you live in a desert/arid environment. Forlorn79, thank you for gifting a sub to Real Radhom. Now imagine you live in a kind of a harsh, arid, or desert environment, and the planet starts getting hotter. Warmer, due to all of this warm gas. And the desert keeps getting hotter. And the arid areas keep getting farther and farther away because the arid areas are turning into the desert areas, and places that once had greenery are now arid and slowly turning into that desert. And water is becoming harder and harder to find because the warm gas also heats up the water, and warmer water means more of that evaporates and turns into more warm gas. So what I'm trying to get at here is that if you live in an area like that, the conditions you live under are getting harsher and harsher, warmer and warmer. It's getting harder to survive there. And due to the harsh conditions that are becoming harsher, well, that can spur more and more radical action to try and get resources for yourself or your people. You kind of see where I'm going with this. The warm gas is CO2. I wasn't being subtle.
Now, I have traveled through the Middle East. It's hot. It's kind of hot in here. It's been hot in the Middle East for a long time. It's a little bit uncomfortable. At no point during my travels did the heat make me want to blow things up or invade Iberia. It just never happened. Now, in fairness, the global warming explanation for Islamic terrorism gets closer to the truth than the purely economic explanation. It's similar to the right-wing explanation of this, that the terrorists hate us for our freedom. Those of a certain age will remember hearing that in the 2000s. Both explanations are better than the claim that terrorism would cease if the Afghanis only had iPads or whatever.
Here, just throwing this out there, okay? This is from the Brookings Institute. Upstream dams in Iran have shrunk the Tigris tributaries, cutting off flow of the Diyala River in Iraq's northeast. Lake Hamrin, the main water source of Iraq's Diyala province, which borders Iran, has lost nearly 70% of its water, embroiling the province in a humanitarian and environmental calamity. Maybe the place you live suddenly losing access to 70% of its drinkable water might radicalize you to take some pretty severe steps in order to survive. I don't know that for sure. I'm speculating a little bit. Yet climate change threatens every country in the region. Aid groups have warned more than 12 million people in Iraq and Syria are losing access to water, food, and electricity because of rising temperatures and record low rainfall. Because again, when it gets hotter there, it stops raining as much, and the rainfall is pretty key to there being, life that's possible in regions like this. Desertification, i.e. the process of fertile land turning into desert, is sweeping across the region in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Iran. The cost of water in Jordan has increased by 30% over the past decade because of the lack of groundwater, meaning that Jordan has to import more and more water from other places. The Middle East's wealthier nations are also at risk. Outside of the fragile countries in the region, the UAE has the highest per capita consumption of water in the world, but risks depleting its freshwater resources in the next 50 years due to population growth and higher domestic water use. We're looking at existential threats to the continued existence of, civilization in these locations. So it's not so much that, just being hot's gonna make you want to do a terrorism, like Michael Knowles is trying to suggest. It's that resource scarcity can spur people to take desperate measures. It's the same way, if someone in the inner city is struggling financially, they might turn to, say, dealing drugs in order to make money and escape their, poverty. People in the Middle East or in other regions that are facing critical resource scarcity might turn to violence in order to provide for their people. It's not that's what happens.
Both explanations point to certain, albeit vague, religious intuitions. In the case of global warming, the intuition of original sin and the apocalypse. In the case of our freedom, the intuition of a conflict over the relation between reason and will, as well as between will and grace. Both explanations ultimately
he worked in a tiny reference to what I'm sure is his favorite television program.
Fail in their timidity. They won't just come out and state the obvious. The conflicts are religious. Our secular elite.
The conflicts have an aspect of them that is religious, yeah, but that's not the only or even the main issue at play.
Denies the importance of religion in human conflict. And worse yet, when they do acknowledge the importance of religion, they take the side of our historical enemies. Once again, Barack Obama, the secular elite par excellence, exemplified this impulse in 2015. On one of the rare occasions in which Obama acknowledged terrorism, he took the opportunity to criticize Christians for things that we supposedly did 800 years ago.
Bro, you literally in the course of this talk referenced a battle that happened over 400 years ago and tried to draw a direct connection between that and October 7th. You literally called it the original October 7th. You've made that direct parallel here.
He said, "Lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place. Remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people..."
He's trying to do an Obama, but he's slipping into doing a George Bush.
"Committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ." Now, we can be certain that Obama himself would have had a hard time remembering these supposedly terrible deeds of the Crusades and of the Inquisition, because with that...
Michael, are you about to say that the Inquisition and the Crusades weren't that bad?
One statement, he made clear that he knew absolutely nothing about the Crusades or the Inquisition. And unfortunately, Obama is not alone in his ignorance. Most people today, when they hear the term Inquisition, which no one expects, thinks of some... I was waiting for groans on that, but I'll take the laugh. That's good. Most of these people think of some legendary campaign to torture and kill Muslims and Jews and, I don't know, any other non-Christian. In reality, the Inquisition has never had any authority over Muslims and Jews.
I mean, like, I'm sorry, you can't claim that the Crusades didn't do, like, an obscene number of war crimes. Like, the one that is in particularly infamous was during the Third Crusade, right? And it was King Richard the First. I believe the lion from the Disney's animated Robin Hood film beheaded 2,000 prisoners of war in front of Saladin's army. So yeah, it's not great, not good stuff.
The Inquisition is an office and a judicial process within the Catholic Church to combat heresy among Christians. It was
also infamously, just as a side note, infamously, many of the Crusades also involved killing people within Europe. Many people, when they think of the Crusades, they think of, armies going to the Middle East and then doing killing. But oftentimes the Crusades were absolutely devastating to Europe itself, because the marching armies would pillage, villages, small castles, etc., in order to feed themselves or enrich themselves. And they would also participate in ethnic cleansings or massacres of local undesirable populations, which included, by the way, Jewish communities, Romani communities, etc. So they also did that. There was also the Children's Crusade. Which was really not great. Let me see here. Yeah, then there was the Children's Crusade, which marched through France, made its way to a port where two French merchants, Hugh the Iron and William of Poscares, offered to carry any children that were willing to pay a small fee by boat to the Middle East. Those children were subsequently taken to Tunisia, where they were sold into slavery by the merchants. So that's how the Children's Crusade ended. So valiant.
Established in the 12th century to maintain and defend the integrity of the faith against heretics. The most controversial offshoot of the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, was founded in 1478, independently of the Holy See, specifically to secure the Reconquista, by which the Spanish had finally managed to retake Iberia from Muslim conquerors. This is not to say that there were not errors and failures of the Inquisition, as there are in all human endeavors. But ironically, the effect of the Inquisition was to restrict rather than to expand religious strife by curtailing the ability of mobs.
You know what he's not going to bring up here, by the way, about the Reconquista? He's not going to bring up the fact that, like, he's trying to portray it as, well, the Reconquista was just the process of getting back control over the Iberian Peninsula and forming the modern nation state of Spain. Except that the Reconquista, and by extension the Inquisition, were founded specifically to hound and persecute anyone who remained on the Iberian Peninsula that still practiced Islam or Judaism. Both of those religions were banned on the Iberian Peninsula.
And demagogues to
thanks
commit
to the
unjust
Reconquista.
violence. The Inquisition continues to exist to this very day as the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. The Crusades are even more widely and perhaps more egregiously misunderstood than the Inquisition. Most people today seem to, even people on the right, even many Christians, seem to think that the Crusades were an unjust war of aggression in which Christians invaded the Middle East in order to displace Muslims from their lands.
I mean, that is very specifically what their goals were. That's actually very specifically what the stated goals of the Crusades were: to take back the Holy Land. That was specifically their goal.
In fact, the Crusades were a defensive war that began because the Seljuk Turks had invaded Christian lands.
You know what's really funny about this? If you're going to try and argue that the Crusades were a defensive war, okay? If you're going to try and make this argument, and you shouldn't, it's a bad one. First of all, the Crusades took place over hundreds of years. It's not one war. It's more like 13 small wars that wound up killing anywhere between 1 and 9 million people. Most estimates range between 2 to 3 million. But yeah. So let's just take a look here. Let's just take a look here. I'm gonna type in the sacking of Byzantium. Yeah, sack of Constantinople. I wonder what led to the sacking of Constantinople. It must have been the crusading armies coming to stop the evil Muslims from sacking the city of Constantinople, one of the last great bastions of Christendom between Europe and the savage Muslim invaders. Oh, wait. The people who sacked Constantinople were the crusading armies of the Fourth Crusade. Oops. Not a very good defensive war, Michael. When the Crusaders are the ones sacking Christian cities and capitals. Oh boy. Yeah, a lot of these crusades, by the way, just wound up with crusaders screwing over Europeans.
Then brutally persecuted the Christians that they found there, and then threatened the capital city of Eastern Christianity, Constantinople. No longer called Constantinople, by the way, so you see that they meant business. The decisive moment that caused the Crusades occurred on August 19th, 1071, when the Seljuks defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert, capturing the emperor and marking the beginning of the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Byzantine defeat at Manzikert led to the eventual Turkic conquest of all of Anatolia, obliterated what remained of Greek and Christian civilization in the East, and posed an existential threat to all of Christendom. The loss at Manzikert led the Byzantine Emperor Alexius to request help from Western Christendom at the Council of Piacenza in 1095. 8 months after that council, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II declared a crusade, which is a word that just means the state of being marked with a cross. That's all it means. He declared it to help besieged Christians in the East. The crusade was to begin on August 15th of the following year, which is the Feast of the Assumption. Unfortunately, while
As a
the mostly
pagan,
French...
I find this funny because it is just Abrahamic on Abrahamic violence.
I mean, true. It's not very funny, but like, it's a little funny. But here's the thing, right?
That's all it means, which is a word that Pope Urban II declared a crusade. Remained of Greek and conquest. The Byzantine defeat at Manzikert led to the eventual Turkic conquest of all of Anatolia, obliterated what remained of Greek and Christian civilization in the East.
And they were the only ones who continued to preserve it into modernity.
And posed an existential threat to all of Christendom. The loss at Manzikert led the Byzantine Emperor Alexius to request help from Western Christendom at the Council of Piacenza in 1095. 8 months after that council, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II declared a crusade, which is a word that just means the state of being marked with a cross. That's all it means. He declared it to help besieged Christians in the East. The crusade was to begin on August 15th of the following year, which is the Feast of the Assumption. Unfortunately, while the mostly French nobles and knights who had waged the crusade made their preparations, a demagogue named Peter the Hermit led a mob of undisciplined and mostly illiterate lunatics on a chaotic journey to beat the knights to the Holy Land, the location of which they didn't know, by the way. So they were just sort of wandering aimlessly, stealing stuff and killing people. These largely German mobs spent the early months of their campaign creating mayhem wherever they went. They massacred Jews along the Rhine, storming the palaces of bishops who tried to protect the Jews. As the great writer and historian Hilaire Belloc notes, quote, "Their anarchy filled the spring of 96. They trailed off in successive mobs eastward to die well-merited deaths at the hands of the outraged peasants of the Danube whom they despoiled, or at the hands of the Turks in the salty dust of Anatolia. Despite this unsanctioned mobs being responsible for most, if not all, of the bad PR that the Crusades have suffered, Belloc rightly observes that, quote, in the military story of the Crusades, they count for nothing. Despite the rocky start, the Crusades, at least the First Crusade, was successful, liberating Christians from Muslim Turkish oppression in Nicaea, Edessa, Antioch, and elsewhere, before finally capturing Jerusalem and then establishing the Crusader kingdom in 1099. This period, the High Middle Ages, marks, to my mind, the height of...
Now, a lot of what he's talking about here, some of it is historically accurate. However, he is being very selective here to try and frame this as a defensive war. Largely because if you learn about the prelude to the First Crusade, one of the things you learn about in, college level courses is that there was an event that is referred to as the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Okay? Now, this occurred in 1009. And in 1027, it was allowed to be rebuilt. However, it was much diminished, we'll say. And it was finished in 1048, which is roughly, 40-ish years before the First Crusade kicks off. However, important to note about the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is that Pope Sergius IV, at the time that it happened, sent out a letter to the monarchs and churches of Europe calling for a holy war in the Middle East, the expulsion of Muslims from the Holy Land. And these events were directly connected to Pope Urban II, the guy who called for the First Crusade, at Claremont. So he's deliberately leaving this part out, that the original inciting event happened almost a century prior to this call for a mass invasion of the Middle East. And not only that, Worship of Olympians, thank you for gifting a sub. I appreciate it. And that the church that they were initially going to go crusade about had already been rebuilt 40 years previously. So the issue here is that the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was one of those events that got widely reported. And if you were a peasant or if you were nobility, it was something that you would have heard about, which is why Pope Urban II drew upon that particular event at the Council of Claremont, right? So all of this to say that the First Crusade was very explicitly not a defensive one, but rather part of a premeditated plan to get revenge for the desecration of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which, for those of you who don't know, it was essentially like purported to be like the church that held the tomb of Jesus. Is it actually the place that Jesus was interred and then like was resurrected? Debatable. But yeah. Apparently, the church was said to have contained both the site where Jesus was crucified as well as his empty tomb. Debatable, but in the parlance of, like, 1000 AD, it was like the most holy place known in Christianity at the time. And so the destruction of it was considered like a huge religious outrage. But one that had happened, in your grandfather's generation or even your great-grandfather's generation by the time the First Crusade came around. This was not something that affected everyday, peasant or noble life in Europe. Instead, this was largely seen by the presiding members of the church as a way of kind of venting the petty frustrations of European nobility. I.e., it was a way of basically getting rid of really inconvenient political figures in like the feudal societies of Europe. So it was a way of getting rid of inconvenient people. It was a way of getting highly motivated folks to go and, effectively colonize other parts of the globe, before that trend really kicked off. And it was also a way to kind of reclaim some semblance of, European identity that like transcended like the borders of feudal fiefdoms, as well as, well, make some money, effectively. Yeah, it must have gotten too hot in Europe.
Western culture.
Too much warm gas.
Much of the greatest art, architecture, philosophy, literature, even perhaps political order that our civilization has ever produced occurred during this period. And our modern secular age cannot understand how it happened. They want to produce it again. They have no idea how it happened the first time. Good luck. Since the Enlightenment, so-called, our elites have scratched their heads at what might have motivated the Crusaders at home and abroad. They've sought for economic motives, political motives, any motive other than the motive clearly stated by the Crusaders themselves.
I mean, it was a religious war, Michael, so, like, yeah, the religious authorities are going to be the ones saying that it's for religious reasons. Like, it was literally called for by the Pope. Yeah, it's a religious war, but let's not pretend that popes were always operating on religious lines. Okay, let's not pretend the church leaders were always, making their decisions based on, the love of God as opposed to political machinations. Like, let's be honest here, Michael. You know that's not true. I know you have a degree in history, and I believe you also have a degree in what was it? Italian? So I know at some point you encountered textbooks that include the Borgia family. That Borgia family. The one that basically bought and sold the position of Pope for, like, a century.
Scholars have insisted.
Finally off work. Thank you for helping me get through it. Got paid today, so felt like sharing.
Well,
From Caracal.
Caracal, thank you for the $10 super chat. I very much appreciate it. And folks, we have been going for over 5.5 hours. If you've been enjoying the show, please hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on the YouTube stream, and consider dropping those subs and donos, because I need the oil in order to live.
In recent decades, centuries even, that the Crusades were but an excuse amid a medieval population boom.
The Borgia family, the one with the sex parties.
Yeah, but the sex parties were for God, if we're going by Michael Knowles' logic.
For disinherited second and third sons, all the spares of the family.
Okay, but, like, unironically, that was a huge problem for European nobility. Because guess what happened? Guys, can anyone take a guess? What would happen if you had, like, 4 sons and 1 country or 1 fiefdom? What do you think would happen in those circumstances? Especially if you either had a sizable fiefdom. What do you think would happen? What was the outcome in a lot of those cases? Was it just peacefully transferred to the oldest one and everyone got along with that idea? Anyone? Bueller? Everyone would share and get along? No, actually, they would do the opposite. They'd kill each other. They'd do little civil wars. It was a real fun time. Just assassinations and civil wars and murders. So yeah, it turns out when you have a hereditary system of governance, a lot rides on the line. And so it was really a lot easier to just send your extra sons out to do a war on the other side of the planet.
To grab some land and wealth for themselves. But as the eminent historian of the Crusades, Thomas Madden, points out, quote, "The advent of computer databases have opened up new vistas of research and analysis. We can now test that theory. And the analysis clearly shows that, quote, the great majority of these knightly crusaders were not spare sons, but instead the lords of their estates." And this is Madden speaking, it was not...
Well, yeah, the majority of them would be the lords of the estates. Because they had the resources to send to go get more wealth and riches by fighting and stealing it from people. Like that, yeah. A lot of the main backers were doing it to get money, Michael. In Michael Knowles' conception, does he think that, like, these wealthy families that have built up immense amounts of wealth over like 1,000 years of accumulation, generation to generation, does he think that they went alone, or does he think that maybe he would recruit people? Amber Brains,
Look, I'm finally getting a hoodie. Yay, I can be warm and fight my flares in style.
Heck yeah. Amber Brains, I hope you like your hoodie. Thank you very much for buying one. Hell yeah. It's been a while since we got... I didn't even recognize that notification. My goodness. But yeah, no. Lords with money... You're Ascended Kitten. Thank you for the $5 dono.
The weasels do not approve of this, Knowles. He could not catch the rabbit.
But like... No, they would hire the second, third, fourth, fifth sons because those sons would have military training, you know? Like the lords and their households would go with effectively mercenary escorts hired and made up of like second and third sons. And on top of that, like, they were going to get a return on their investment. You don't just uproot your entire family's livelihood and wealth with no expectation of getting a return on that investment. Like, they're not going to slaughter people out of the goodness of their hearts. I know, crazy concept here.
Not those with the least who took up the cross, but rather those with the most. In purely material terms, Crusaders were impoverished rather than enriched by taking up the cross. They did it for one reason, the reason that entirely eludes our modern elites. They did it for love of God. The motivation was religious. And the Crusaders held Jerusalem for almost a century. But eventually, they were defeated by Saladin at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. Subsequent crusades defended and even restored Latin Christian control over territories in and around the Holy Land, but they never...
Now, like, here's the thing, right? Michael Knowles is trying to point at the fact that a lot of crusaders didn't ultimately wind up becoming wealthy as evidence of, like, see, they weren't doing it for money, except that, like, a lot of them did become wealthy, just not most of them. Because, again, much like in your average gold rush, some people get very, very wealthy, but most people don't. Most people just kind of, you know, sift day in and day out and make just enough money to live. And then by the time the gold rush is over, they've basically just kind of squeaked by. That is most people. But if you're really lucky, you can make a lot of money. And that is basically the financial and economic legacy of the Crusades in a very tiny nutshell.
Again securely held Jerusalem. The Crusader states fully collapsed at the end of the 13th century, after which the Holy Land was ruled by the Muslim Mamluk Empire, followed by the Muslim Ottoman Empire, followed after World War I by the at least somewhat Christian British Empire, which had promised a portion of it to the Jews, who received their state by way of UN resolution in 1947, and finally by way of war in 1948, a Jewish victory that nearby Muslim states and non-state militants have attempted to reverse ever since, up to the present day. The Holy Land, the focal point of so much conflict, is not particularly rich in natural resources. At first glance, it is not located in any particularly strategic area.
I mean, I guess you could come to that conclusion if you are blind and therefore aren't getting that much information from a glance. But otherwise, it's like it's like the trade hub of the world, where the entire world gets condensed into needing to cross the Middle East, and that turns it into one of the wealthiest positions on the entire globe.
There is no particularly well-defined Palestinian national identity, and the area that the Palestinians wish to call a nation is not even geographically cohesive.
I mean, it used to be.
But the conflict is not really about any of that, despite what...
I don't think you can argue that there's not a well-defined Palestinian identity, because, like, very clearly there is. Like, people identify themselves as Palestinian. Like, that clearly, they are a cohesive people. And one of their goals that has persisted for, like, the last century is having a state of their own. So, like, by the metrics you're trying to use here, Michael, you're just wrong.
These modern self-styled geniuses think. The conflict is about religion, which the West can no longer understand.
Again, saying that the conflict is entirely about religion is simply incorrect. He's trying to frame it as like, yes, the liberal elites of the West don't believe in religion and therefore are ignoring this cause. And it's like, no. You don't have to believe in a religion in order to understand how it can cause strife. You just have to know your history.
Because the West has lost its faith. Now, we're still human in the West. Man is still a religious creature, even here. So even in the secular West, we follow some kind of religion. We sacrifice our effort and our material goods for some kind of god or gods, including the people with the big estates and all the most to lose. Only now our religion is confused. We sacrifice to the nature gods to stave off climate change. We sacrifice to...
That's not how staving off climate change works, Michael. Like, I guess if words don't mean anything anymore, I feel like you started this out saying words mean things, but now you're just not using words correctly.
To the war gods for democracy around the world. But it's all kind of scattershot, half-baked and unimpressive. Other peoples are not so confused. Other peoples still know what they believe in and are willing to fight for it. It is an incredible irony of the West, an incredible irony in all of our history, that this civilization, once called Christendom, fought a millennium and a half of holy wars to defend its civilization against an aggressive rival, only now to throw open its borders and invite the very same...
I mean, again, just going to back this up.
Of the tyranny of the West they believe in and are willing to fight for it. It is an incredible irony of the West, an incredible irony in all of our history, that this civilization, once called Christendom, fought a millennium and a half of holy wars to defend its civilization against an aggressive rival.
Just want to point out here, if you're fighting a holy war, it's not in defense of your civilization. A holy war is definitionally in defense of your religion, which is not synonymous with civilization, as much as Michael Knowles wishes it was.
Only now to throw open its borders and invite the very same rival in. We think we're now too good for holy wars. In fact, we're no longer good enough. All conflict, Cardinal Manning reminds us, is ultimately theological.
This man is extraordinarily racist, and he's hiding behind religious differences in order to, like, you know, try and make it palatable to his audience.
Conflict will not disappear because we no longer understand theology or practice our faith.
Oh, Stadman, I saw you at me on Twitter, and I got really confused because I couldn't figure out who you were talking to because they had me blocked. And anyway, that's how I found out that apparently Adam Friended from the Stitch and Adam podcast apparently blocked me. I've never interacted with him before, but he has me blocked on Twitter for some reason.
Conflict, in fact, will get much worse.
I guess I did make a video or two criticizing their god awful show. So, you know, I guess fair, but like I was surprised.
If you think holy war is bad, just wait till you see unholy war. And if you think the West
Oh, damn dog. Damn dog. Oh, wait until you see unholy war. What are they going to do? What's the unholy war gonna do, Michael? Are we gonna get some like necromancy or something?
Once called Christendom is bad. Just wait till you see, God forbid, what replaces it. Thank you very much.
Also, just as an FYI, if you want to argue that the Crusades were really like just and good, you might not want to talk too much about that First Crusade. You might have talked a little bit too much about that First Crusade there, Michael, because it ended with the siege of Jerusalem that resulted in like 100,000 civilians being butchered by the First Crusade. Mostly Muslims and Jewish folks. So, yeah, not exactly the proudest moment for the Prince of Peace, I guess.
Thank you very much. Very kind, thank you.
All
now,
right.
I believe, even after saying all that, we do still have time for questions, right?
We do. We're
Good.
going to be starting our Q&A. So if you guys have questions for Mr. Knowles, you can go ahead. We're going to ask that you go that side of the room and start forming a line around here. We have an orange line. Please stand behind that. And only one question per person. No follow-up questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. No. Thank you. Thank you very much. And, you know, we have a rule at the Daily Wire, which I hate, but I like the Daily Wire, but I hate the rule. And the rule is that if you disagree with me, you can cut to the front. So I know when Ben came to Berkeley years and years ago, it basically shut the city down and they blew stuff up. But then I was talking to my friend, Mr. Matt Walsh, and I said, are they going to go crazy there? And he said, no, I showed up. Basically, no one protested. And then
Yeah, because no one cares about you guys anymore, except for me. I care.
When I looked outside, there was a very small protest that I couldn't tell if it was a homeless encampment or it wasn't rowdy, you know. But if any of the protesters happen to be here, you're welcome to cut to the front of the line against my will.
As a passionate supporter of traditional gender roles, do you think there's room for women to enter the workplace in a proper Christian marriage? And if so, how does that affect the dynamic of the relationship?
Now, women have always worked, you know. I'm about as trad as it gets, but we shouldn't be basing our understanding of political economies on some, you know, a 1950s sitcom or something like that. Women still worked, and they still are expected to work today. The question is how exactly they work. And by the way, women still worked even in ways that affected the public economy, though frequently it was from the position of the home or the community. So. You know, I tend to side with Simone de Beauvoir on this question, the French feminist, who said that the push to get women to desire careers and to enter into the workforce was really just a way to advance a feminist conception of women's lib and ultimately to deprive women of the choice, which most of them really want to make, to be married and make a home and have a family. I think that's what it was about, and I believe her when she says it. So, you know, there's great diversity and variety in the world. If a woman really wants to go make spreadsheets for the rest of her life for Mr. McGillicuddy, who's going to toss her out the moment she doesn't make money for him anymore, she's free to do that.
Man, that sounds like a terrible job, Michael. Why would men want to do that job, though? Why would you send a man out to do that job if Mr. McGillicuddy is so mean?
But no women are laboring under the misconception that they can't go do that today. In fact, what they're told is that they can't do the opposite, that they can't stay home, they can't have a family, they can't manage a home economy.
Okay, can I just say something to all conservatives? This is just a message to you conservatives out there. I want you to think really hard and ask yourself, have you ever seen a leftist or a liberal ever say that a woman can't stay home and have babies and be a homemaker if they want to? Have you ever encountered that? Have any of you in chat, have any single one of you ever encountered that scenario? Any single one of you? Nope. Stadman? Nope. No one's saying that? We want to make it easier, actually? Yeah. I think women should be able to stay home and take care of children and raise them if they want to. I think we should have a society that helps people do that, actually, if that is what they want to do with their lives. You know, we should have, decommodified housing. We should have Medicare for all. We should have, food bank, federally stocked food banks. We should have these things so that if somebody just wants to stay home and raise their kids, they can definitely do that even without a job that pays in in society, you know? We couldn't do that. We could do that, by the way. We could if we wanted to do that. If we collectively gathered enough political capital amongst ourselves, we could do that. But Michael Knowles doesn't want that. He wants women to be forced into the workplace, whether they'd like to be there or not, to work minimum wage jobs, and eventually, hopefully marry someone wealthier than them, a man who can take them away from all of this and then work barefoot in the kitchen all day, raising the children, pumping a new one out every 9 months like clockwork.
And it's because of what Simone de Beauvoir said, which is that if women are given that choice, pretty much all of them will make it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, for sure. Hi, Michael. Just a quick question to clarify.
Honestly, trains and bullshit, the one thing I do hear is that you can't stay home and take care of the kids if you're a man. If you are a man, then society tells you that you shouldn't stay home and take care of your kids because that's women's work. Yep, I have heard it said to men. I've never heard it said to women. Elaine's parents never said that specifically, but they thought it was somehow feminist to not teach her to cook and other basic life skills. Yeah, that's not good. Hot take, everyone should learn how to cook. Everyone should know how to cook at least one signature dish.
Are you aware of the fake elector scheme purported by Donald Trump during the 2020 election to fake a slate of electors?
I'm not familiar with any fake elector schemes, so perhaps you could enlighten me. Please, pass the microphone, please.
She said it could, yeah. So just to clarify, typically
boy.
states certify electors and send to D.C. to kind of certify the vote.
Yep.
What Donald Trump tried to do, along with John Eastman, his lawyer, is fake
Very good
slates of
lawyer.
fake slates of electors. Great for stealing election, maybe. Fake a slate of electors for each of the swing states. Try to submit them during January 6th and try to get Pence to certify the vote in his favor.
So you're saying
Knowing
there
this,
was a controversy over
I'm developing my own steak recipe and own way of preparing steak.
Cool. Thank you for the $5 dono, Olympians.
who had really won the electors in a state, and there were two sides who were disagreeing over that.
Except the fake elector scheme was taking place, I believe, prior to the election, right?
And so they were trying to work out during the certification process on January 6th, the worst day in the history of this.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You can't legally just create another slate of electors. That's actually illegal and election tampering.
Republic, what to do about it. So my question to you is there any historical precedent for that, for what you call the fake elector scheme?
Sure. So there's one case in which I believe in Hawaii, where it was in between Nixon and Kennedy, but not only was that case set as not precedent, it was also due to an actual recount that the electors were certified.
You're missing another case. You're missing the actual historical precedent, which was the Compromise of 1877, when during the 1876 presidential election, basically the exact same thing happened. And so, because there was a controversy over who had won, and we still have a separation of powers between the executive, the judicial, and the legislative, as well as, at least in those days, the separation of powers between the states and the federal government, then a compromise was worked out to deal with what happens from time to time, a contested election. Now, we've had contested elections in more recent memory, like the 2000 election, when Democrats denied that George W. Bush had legitimately won the election. So they threw that one into the court.
Just as an FYI, the Compromise of 1877 is also called the Corrupt Bargain. Just in case you guys forgot about that. Basically, what was happening was Congress was filibustering the certified results, and yeah, this was to end Reconstruction. It literally ended the process of ensuring equality between African Americans and white citizens. So, it wasn't good.
And that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then they still didn't accept the results after George W. Bush won it. So it seems to me what ought to have happened on January 6th, the worst day in this or any republic, according to some people, is that maybe we should have followed the historical precedent when almost that exact same thing had happened from 1877. And actually, that was precisely what was proposed by Senator Ted Cruz, as well as some...
Also, I can't help but notice that, this absolutely is not the same as what Donald Trump did. What was going on was filibustering the certification of the results and the results themselves indefinitely. And so that is what then led to the corrupt bargain that solidified the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes. And so when he's talking about this in particular here, he's being disingenuous. Because alternative slates of electors, to my knowledge, were not created. Let's see. Let me take a look here. In the November 1876 United States presidential election, Samuel J. Tilden received 184 uncontested electoral votes, and Rutherford B. Hayes received 165. with 185 votes necessary for a majority. 4 states, Florida, Louisiana, Oregon, and South Carolina, returned disputed slates of presidential electors with a total of 20 votes at stake. Any of the disputes being resolved in Tilden's favor would secure him the presidency, while Hayes needed all 20 votes to be certified in his favor. To resolve these disputes in the absence of a clear constitutional directive, Congress passed the Electoral Commission Act, which established a 15-member commission of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats to review contested elections. The commission voted 8-7 along party lines to certify each disputed vote in favor of Hayes. Under the Act, the Commission's findings were final unless rejected by both the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate, controlled by Republicans, declined to do so, but Democratic representatives in the House resorted to dilatory tactics by raising spurious objections to electors from Vermont and Wisconsin and filibustering the debate on those objections, which threatened to extend the controversy beyond the scheduled inauguration on March 5th. However, Speaker of the House Samuel J. Randall refused to entertain the dilatory motions, and eventually the filibusters gave up. A few Democrats complained loudly that Tilden had cheated. There was talk that Tilden had been cheated. There's talk of forming armed units that would march on Washington, but President Grant tightened military security and nobody marched on Washington. So basically, what he's trying to say here is just there's not a parallel. There's not a parallel here between 1870, the corrupt bargain of 1877, and January 6th, or the alternative slate of electors, the fake elector scheme. It's just not. It's just not true.
Supporters in the House of Representatives. And that was all going just swimmingly until the Democrats basically rammed it through and the Republicans lost their steam. If you are really of the opinion that when one party in the country shuts down the country, locks people in their homes, changes the voting rules, in some cases unconstitutionally, like in the case of Pennsylvania, which had prohibited widespread mail-in ballots in its constitution,
It didn't. He's just lying.
And then, after all of that, changes the election and then slows down the counting of the votes by not only hours, but days and weeks. And there are questions in people's minds over the integrity of the election. After Democrats had denied the results of multiple elections just within living memory, if you deny...
There's a difference between saying that, oh, Al Gore probably won the 2000 election, and actively making a plan to overthrow the government in order to secure your ascension as president, rather than your duly elected opponent. Also, every single legal challenge, barring like 2 on technicalities, was flatly rejected by the courts, Michael.
Half the country has the right to maybe work out that controversy, then I suppose you think...
We did work it out in the courts, and the court said, nah.
We ought to just give the Democrats all of the elections. But if you believe, as I do, that it's legitimate to object to elections that are conducted unfairly and illegally in some cases, then you have to work out some kind of...
Damn, you have evidence of an illegal election, Michael? You should present that in court. You should take it to court, Michael. Oh, wait, he won't, because he's lying.
Compromise, and what would have happened is, well, exactly what the Republicans tried to do.
Sorry. Please search up the...
One more. You can give them one more.
One more?
For sure. Okay, for sure. So I understand that might be the case. However, in this specific circumstance, Donald Trump selected random people who there was no basis for a recount. There was no evidence for it.
What is the basis to be an elector? What is the qualification?
The qualification that the state has to certify it, which are not being, the state did not certify it.
How do you become an elector before the certification of the results?
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what the process is.
You're not exactly
that.
sure about a lot of things. So I don't mean to knock you, because a lot of people share your ignorance. They share the ignorance of the actual precedent that that preceded the January 6th in presidential elections. But this is why I think people get very passionate on this subject, as you have been, without very many facts. And it's why many people call this an insurrection or a coup d'etat.
Well, but you can be an elector. Like, you're getting him on this as like a technicality that like he doesn't know how electors are chosen, and like the parties just choose them internally to like reward them for service to the party. But like there's a difference between certified electors and just random people, which I believe is the point that this young man was trying to make. Like, there's a difference between just a random group of people and the certified electors of the state. The certified electors are the ones certified by the state as the rightful slate of electors.
Or
if you are not in that group, you are just a guy.
You know, somehow turning America into a banana republic. And
Read the
those
Eastman memos.
those
Thank
very
you.
same people will support the side that is currently attempting to imprison its political rivals and to justify the assassination of him twice and counting.
The Democrats haven't tried to justify attempted assassinations on Donald Trump. What are you talking about, bro? Also, let's be real here. Let's just take a look. Who's talking about using, locking up political enemies? Who's doing that? Could it be this guy? Could it be this guy? The guy who worked with him for 2 years? Who's saying that he wants to deploy troops against American citizens? Let's see. Let's see. Came back with a proposal to supplement federal police already based in Washington with a few thousand National Guard members, a battalion from the 82nd Airborne Division that could be summoned on short notice from North Carolina, and several hundred soldiers with the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, a unit at nearby Fort Myer, whose role is mostly ceremonial at Arlington National Cemetery, but Trump never gave the final order to put active duty soldiers in the streets. He wanted to do it. He was suggestive of it, said one person familiar with the matter, who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive issue. But that's also the kind of typical. That's also kind of typical of his decision making. He knows that if he gives the order, he owns it. Active duty troops got as close to Washington as nearby Fort Bolivar, Virginia, and other installations on the outskirts of the city. It was not the only time that Trump, as president, wanted to deploy the armed forces within the United States against the advice of civilian and military leaders. He also sent active duty troops to bolster security at the southern border and sought military hardware for a ceremonial parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, with less than 2 weeks until Election Day, some of Trump's most senior former advisors are warning Americans to take his militaristic impulses seriously. His longest-serving chief of staff, John Kelly, told the New York Times that he feels Trump meets the definition of fascist, expected personal loyalty from military leaders, and spoke admiringly of Adolf Hitler. Let's see. In running to retake the White House, Trump has named his unfulfilled demands to deploy the military against civil unrest as one of his top regrets, and one he aims not to repeat. His allies have laid plans for him to do so by invoking emergency authority under the Insurrection Act of 1807. The next time, I'm not waiting, he said at a March 13th, 2023 campaign speech in Davenport, Iowa. In a Fox News interview October 13th, he said the military could handle his domestic political opponents, such as congressional Democrats and election protesters, whom he deemed the enemy from within. So, yeah, I think we know who wants to do that. right now.
Doesn't seem to support democracy to me.
I mean, Michael Knowles, you don't support democracy. We know that. You're a fascist. You want Donald Trump to become your dictator daddy. Oh, I'm sorry, your big dictator daddy.
Hi, Michael. Honored to speak with you. Thank you for your speech.
Thank you so much.
Just wanted to ask, you said that all war is necessarily theological. So given that even animal tribes, chimpanzee tribes, have wars, what makes all war theological?
I don't think that chimpanzees have wars. I think animals fight. But I don't think that we're merely an animal.
Well, wait, they do have wars though. Like they'll like form like posses and like sally forth to attack a neighboring society of chimpanzees. Like they absolutely do that.
Because I take theology seriously, I think that man is different from the lower beasts. So what differentiates us is that we possess intellect and will. So we can reason abstractly, we have a sense of the moral law, and we...
Wait, but we can also see similar behaviors in other animals, just maybe to lesser degrees, you know? Like we have evidence of like gorillas who've been taught sign language able to grasp abstract concepts like death, for example, or the idea of non-existence from existence. You know, like we have evidence that like being able to think abstractly or like understand or even communicate is not, it's not unique to humans. So like his argument's just kind of flat on that one.
We can be held to account for violating the moral law. This is why if I go rob somebody in San Francisco, well, in this city, I actually won't be held to account, but in like normal cities, you would be arrested and tried for that. But if a monkey went and robbed somebody and took a pie out of a window, you wouldn't put the monkey on trial. So this pertains to human beings specifically. And the reason that all human conflict ultimately is theological is because man is made in the image and likeness of God, and we possess intellect and will, and we possess freedom, which is the greatest gift that God has given us, and we can abuse our freedom. And the abuse of our freedom ultimately boils down beyond questions of mere politics, and even beyond questions of mere practical morality, but even to questions of what it means to be a human being. Now we're dealing with those anthropological questions with the transgender movement, where people don't know what a man is or what a woman is. It gets down to epistemological questions, how we can understand anything at all, how we know that we can rely on our faculties of reason. It gets down to questions of being. What does it even mean to be? And then ultimately, inevitably, you have to get down to a question, well, what is the source of all being? What is the source of all that there is? Why are my words intelligible? What's at the fundament of all of it? You know, what is the unmoved mover and the uncaused cause, whom we call God? There's no avoiding that. You can put your head in...
I mean, there is. Like, you don't have to call it God. It might be something else. The plain fact here is that you just don't know. You know, like, and in the whole of not knowing, you simply place God. If your belief in God is simply a belief in not understanding something, then like, can you really call just something you don't understand God? Is that sufficient for you? That seems really sad to me. It seems like a thought-terminating cliche. Like, oh, well, it's simply God, and I won't ask any more questions.
In the sand as we do in the modern West now. But
good morning, Elaine Malachi.
The question is still there, whether we wish to answer it or not. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello, Michael. I had a whole speech planned, but I was told to keep this super short, so hopefully we have some back and forth. My question boils down to this. You're a Catholic, right? So you believe that if we pray to Mary, our prayers can be enhanced in that Mary has a special relationship with Jesus.
I think God loves his mother.
Yes. I would agree with you there. So my question is, in Matthew, there's a point where Jesus is speaking, and his disciples come up to him, and they say, "Sir, your mother and your brothers are here to speak with you." And he says, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" And he says, "Them that do the will of my Father, they are my mother and my brothers."
Ooh, just a heads up. We are only 4 likes away on the YouTube stream from hitting 150 likes. Let's do it. I believe in you guys. And also, please consider dropping those subs and donos, folks. You guys have been wonderful tonight.
And I think that this is talking about the different relationship between the familial relationship that we have with Christ and like our relationship with him versus his relationship. So we are told that we can come boldly to the throne of grace. So my question is, in what way are our prayers enhanced as opposed to us just going to God directly?
Well, a really, really good question. Our Lord tells us this. You know, who are my brothers? Who is my mother? Those who do the will of my Father. But then, of course, what is the utterance of Mary that begins the whole story? The angel Gabriel comes to Mary and says, "Hail Mary, full of grace. The Lord is with you. You know, you're going to conceive." And what does Mary say? She says, "I am the Lord's handmaiden. His will be done." So she does the will of God the Father.
Yeah, but how is that different from other Christians? Like, presumably other Christians have done the will of God the Father, hence they're Christian.
When our Lord says, I come not to bring peace but a sword, and I'll turn families against one another, I'll turn son against father, does he then mean that we ought to ignore the commandment to revere our parents? I don't think so, because he says, not a jot or tittle will pass from the law until all is completed. He is the fulfillment of the law. So what is he saying? I think he is saying much what you're describing about a personal relationship of grace that we can have with God. But this is not constricted. This is only expanded by the community of saints, because our Lord loves his friends. Just as if you wanted a prayer, if your family member were sick, you'd turn to Joe down the street and say, "Hey, Joe, man, can you pray for me?" Everybody does that. And Joe's just some guy. He's just Joe. You know, that guy's nothing, man. I mean, he's like a little something, but he's not the mother of our Lord. So if I'm going to ask Joe to pray for me, why wouldn't I ask the mother of God to pray for me? Because don't forget, the first miracle that we see in the Gospels, the first miracle of Christ's ministry, is the wedding at Cana. And what happens at the wedding at Cana? Someone comes up to Mary, and then Mary says, "Hey, go to my son and do whatever he tells you to do." And what does our Lord say? He says, "What is it between you and me, woman? My hour is not yet come." But then what does he do? He does what his mother asks, because he's a good son. And she's a perfect woman. So, it's...
Wait, she's a perfect woman? Okay, I have to admit, I have a blind spot here. Is Mary supposed to be perfect in Catholic conceptions of theology? Like in Catholic theology, is she perfect? Perfect and perfection carry a lot of weight in Christian theology. Yeah, like nobody's supposed to be perfect except Jesus. I'm wondering, is Michael Knowles using language a bit loosely here?
It seems to me like that's a good thing to do. And just as a practical matter, and historical matter, because we've been talking about history and a lot of Christian history all evening, Christians have prayed to Mary and to the saints in heaven who are depicted, I believe, and as is traditionally understood, in the book of the Apocalypse. The saints holding their bowls with the incense coming up. And the incense is the prayers of the saints. Who are they praying for? They're not praying for the damned in hell. They're there forever. They're not praying for the people in heaven. They're praying for us. So they are bringing our prayers to the Father. However, just as in historical matter, the fact that Christians have always prayed to Mary and to the saints, if I were a modern person who was skeptical of this, that would raise my eyebrow, and I'd say, well, who's most likely to have it right? All the doctors and fathers of the church and all Christians for 2,000 years, or not all, but most Christians for 2,000 years, or like me living in 2024 when nobody knows anything or even what a woman is. I think it brings up a little bit of an epistemic humility, and that could be helpful to us, because it was, I think, John Henry Newman, who was very anti-Catholic, and then he converted and became a Catholic saint. It's funny how history works sometimes. But he said, look, I've got plenty of questions. I've got all sorts of questions about the faith. If you knew everything about the faith, it probably wouldn't be the true faith. But 10,000 questions does not make one doubt. And that's a great cigar box you have, by the way.
Follow up, sorry.
Just really quickly. Thank you, guys. So,
for the YouTube audience, that's Mayflower cigars that he's holding.
Yes.
I don't want that to be missed.
thank you. I don't know if I'm the only one. I had you sign it, and you signed it, so thank you so much for
man,
that.
all right. But that was your box. I signed it up there, and I was hoping there would be stogies in there that I could pilfer and smoke.
Well,
but it was totally empty, other than magic marker.
Yeah, I figured I'd get in trouble because there's signs all over saying, like, no tobacco on campus. But
forget about that. Listen,
that's what I was going to say.
There's barely any Berkeley admins in here. Anyway.
Yeah, I was like, wait, he took all... Anyway.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
So, thank you for your answer, and it was really good. My only question was, you mentioned, like, I might ask my brother to pray for me, and that makes sense to me because, the prayer of a righteous man avails much, so if fellow Christians praying for each other, that makes sense to me. I just get hung up on, there's a verse in Timothy, I believe it's chapter 5, 1 Timothy 5, maybe don't quote me on it, but it says that there's one God and one mediator between man and God. That is the person Jesus Christ. Yeah. So it would seem that me asking my brother to pray for me is just, the prayer of a righteous man avails much, just asking for that intercession. But for me to pray to Mary seems like I'm putting her in the position to mediate between me and God.
Why does it seem that way? You just said you're asking your brother for intercessory prayer, but then when you do the same thing to Mary, you're asking her to be the mediator between you and God. But I don't see why isn't it just intercessory prayer all around?
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. When it comes to questions of theology, I got to be honest with you guys. That I always ask this question, like, why the F do I need someone to pray for me if I can just go talk to God directly? Why on earth does anyone need others to go and pray on their behalf if you can just go talk to God directly? Like, he's God. Well, no, did he just make a good point? Well, no, because none of it's real, number one. And two, also, like, his point is that other people praying for you does help. So, get as many people to pray for you as possible.
Well, okay,
I agree that Mary is better than your brother.
I'm not
but,
praying. I'm not praying to my brother.
Well, you are, because to pray is to ask. I mean, there are multiple senses of pray, but to pray is like, I pray thee, sir, give me a Mayflower cigar, but you won't answer that prayer, unfortunately.
Absolutely not. The ports are shut down. I can't get any more. Yeah, I have to wrap it up. So, if there's one mediator between man and God, so that doesn't change what it says in Timothy, then maybe I shouldn't ask my brother to pray for me. I know that's not true.
But you do it anyway. That. We all do it naturally, and we've done it for 2,000 years. And maybe it's because there's a difference between mediation and intercession, and maybe even there's a difference between a mediator and a co-mediatrix and intercessors. And
well, you don't need to, but we've been doing it anyway, so that's clearly we're clearly all of us are doing it according to natural law. And it's like, buddy, if you're doing any of this because you have the natural inclination that is leading you to this conclusion, that's insane. That is actual insanity. Like, if you were stuck on a coconut island, you would never in 1,000 years come up with the story of Christianity as a way to explain a spirit, like any kind of like religious reason for why anything exists. You would not be able to come up with that. Which is not a point in its favor, like it's a unique special snowflake. I'm just saying, like, this is not a result of, like, the natural, it's only natural. God created everything. Of course Christianity's the answer. Like, nah.
And maybe there's a difference between forms of worship, like latria and dulia and hyperdulia. And these are sophisticated questions, and I understand it's hard to figure it out.
He's just throwing out theological terminology in order to like sound smart and sidestep this entire conversation.
But fortunately, we're not like the modern liberals. We didn't just, to quote Kamala Harris, fall out of a coconut tree. We have this beautiful civilization and we have this church which has endured as an institution for 2,000 years and has actually answered these questions. Even you can basically ask St. Thomas Aquinas what to have for breakfast on Tuesday. He'll give you an answer, or pretty close to it. So I agree, these are sophisticated questions, and you're obviously quite interested and quite bright, and so I would encourage you to pursue those answers, because the answers are there.
Thank you so much for coming.
Like, just to take one example of one of the things he said, he used the term hyperdulia, which is just a fancy-sounding word that refers to, like, the special kind of worship in Catholicism that is reserved for, like, the Virgin Mary. Like, you don't gotta use that word. No one knows what that word means. Come on, you just use it to try and sound fancy.
Hi, Michael. I loved you in House of Shades. It's a great movie.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So one of the things that you
Did
said.
you like any of my other acting work or no?
Oh, coming out swinging. Just in case any of you forgot, House of Shades. That's the that's an interesting film.
And the one where there was some girl that was having sex with her brother you were in, that was a great one as well.
I actually don't remember. I can't tell if this is a bit you're doing.
This is not a bit. I swear to God, you say... No, it doesn't matter. Anyway.
I don't think I did that. Listen, I've done a lot of...
You were not the brother. You were accusing them of incest. Don't worry. You're clean. Anyway. So one of the things...
I'll have to go back to my catalog. I've done a lot of roles in acting. And the only one they ever want to bring up is when I play a half-gay guy in a Yale movie. Which, if you're only half-gay in a Yale movie, is pretty straight, actually, on a normal curve. But people get very...
I mean, I guess...
What the fuck, Nicole?
It's not what you think.
Not what I think. Are you fucking your brother?
No!
What? Oh, I like it when you're rough with me, pretty lady. Asshole! Guys, quit it! This is some serious shit! You're fucking right, it's serious shit! God, I think you broke my nose! I'm gonna do fucking worse than that! What are you gonna say? Because you have an incest with your sister? I'm adopted, remember? That makes it better! Guys, shut the fuck up! 30 days!
Guys, we're almost there!
Fuck! God, this is so gay. This is just too surreal for me. You son of a bitch!
Eric! Eric!
What? Give me one good reason I shouldn't beat the shit out of him, huh?
I'll give you two! I love you, and I'm pregnant!
Fuck!
Fuck. Maybe if you stopped whacking off to Lara Croft and left the house once in a while, you might find some adventure and get a real woman. Maybe if you stopped whacking off to Lara Croft every once in a while, left the house, you would get some adventure.
Holy shit, what is that? Why would you get out of here, please?
I haven't really found my thing.
You're in.
Bear tenor. I damn near killed it. Who is she? It's like a stock joke.
Oh, that doesn't mean anything.
Sometimes I wish the elderly would just die.
Yeah, you might recognize some of the clips from here because I used them for our soundboard.
This is just too surreal for me.
Sometimes I wish the elderly would just die. So, you want to go out after we wrap this up? Maybe have some sex?
Ew, what?
Don't make me show a hoe. Listen, man, there's no need for that. She'll make it up to you. Let it slide, baby. Is that a threat? That's a promise, sucker.
No Jimmy. And so when he called me, he didn't even tell me what it was about. And I said, yeah, I'm absolutely in. And he said, okay, it's a Chinese hopping vampire movie. And I thought he was joking. I didn't think that was a genre of film. But it is, and it's really good. And yeah, I'm just thrilled that I could be a part of it.
You're perfect. Your clothes are perfect. Don't tell me you speak with a Latino accent, because that would be really weird.
You talking to me, man?
My partner would never snitch on me. What you take me for, man?
I think this is like the biggest movie he's been in.
I'm Bosco. No, I'm going to be Bosco.
No, that's me.
And your accent sounds really fake.
Don't be mad at me, I'm just the player.
Looks like you're wearing a costume.
I'm more Hispanic than you, and I'm not even Hispanic. My name is Bosco. You call me Bosco.
Steve Fernandez.
Like, I remember seeing this in video rental stores at some point. Media Breakdown, thank you for the $5 dono. So earlier it was Dommy Mommy Jack, and now it's Glasses Jack. Our cup runneth over. Just a little bit of both.
Alex Haynes, as I live and breathe.
Cody, so
what
nice to see you.
Coincidence. Oh my, I can't believe you're here. I tell you, Manhattan may be big, but it's still an island. And you're an actor. You're acting, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, I am acting.
Wow. I'm so jealous. I wish I could do that. You know, I care about money or success.
Juggling offers, you know. We're gonna sit on my own stuff.
Yeah, you're playing hard to get. That's what you got to do, huh?
It's been tough.
Whoa.
Sorry.
This girl is about to make the biggest mistake of her life.
What?
Yeah, she's gonna leave the bar without meeting me. Yeah, let's get coffee though, huh? Yeah, Facebook me, bro. Hey, let me buy you something.
Yeah. Fun stuff. Thanks for that acting reel, Michael Knowles.
Very confused about this because in modern days, people don't understand what acting is. So, like for instance, if I'm in a
You know, I'm just gonna spitball this here, Michael Knowles, but I don't think you know what acting is either. Just, you know, judging from your shtick.
Sometimes I wish the elderly would just die.
movie or a play or a television show, and I go on stage, and my name is Billy. My name isn't really Billy. You see, my name is Michael, but on stage or in a movie or something, that would be my name. If I'm a soldier, if I'm a football player, if I'm a half homosexual, or whatever, these are things that I am not.
Half a homosexual?
Not in my real life, but I pretend to be it if I'm an actor. What's difficult about our modern age is people confuse make-believe and reality. So today, if a guy comes out and he says, hey, I'm a woman, you'd say, okay, well, I don't know what play I'm watching. I didn't know I went to the theater, but he would say, no, I'm really a woman. I'm really a woman. And that's a problem, I guess. When you lose your mooring in objective reality, you confuse make-believe for the real thing.
So speaking of which, one of the things you said we would lose had we lost the battle of tours was modern science. But in your show, I see you often say that science is mostly fake in regards to transgenderism, climate change, cigars that might give you cancer.
Science is mostly fake.
Yeah,
but science is good.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, so you know your enemy's both strong and weak. Yeah.
Natural philosophy is good, but
right.
like the notion that a little boy is actually a girl, which we call science today, in the same way that we mistakenly call a little boy a girl, that is fake and not good.
You know, there's a really unfortunate thing. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Oops. Girl does actually mean either sex. Whoops. Sorry.
Right. So my question is, when I read all these studies,
The etymology of girl was that it was a word that was originally used for both boys and girls.
some of which, of course, you think are fake, or talk to the most educated researchers in my life, it all seems to disagree with you. So how do you pursue evidence-based policy if you ignore so much of the evidence? Or do you flip the script like your coworker says and put your feelings over facts?
Which studies do you read?
Yeah, the fake ones, I guess.
Yeah, can you cite the studies you're talking about?
Yeah, I've got them all in my pocket, and we can just read
Could you
them.
name even one of them off the top of your head?
No, I just threw them all out.
I know, but this
they're
is
all
my
fake,
point.
right?
So these people you're being sarcastic because it's the last refuge of someone who has no answer. But you say that I
mean, you wanted a name of a study off. See, this is why you should never go and talk to these people unprepared. Like, if this guy had actually brought like a couple of the studies with him, that would have been so badass though. That would have been so badass if he had been able to like reach into his back pocket, actually pull out like one of the studies, or like throw up like a Excel spreadsheet of like, oh yeah, here's the name and URL of like 20 different studies. Here you go. Knock yourself out, kid.
I don't believe in modern science, and you're such a sophisticate.
Well, yeah, of course, he'd just dismiss it in the moment. But, like, it would be really good rhetorically.
All these studies, you don't read them. None of these people read them, and half the studies are irreplicable. So that's my...
If they're not replicable, then they're not really subject to peer review. Like, you need... Like, if you mean that they're not replicable in the sense that, like, the people the studies were done on proceeded then to like grow up and like or like get older and like continue with their treatment, like I guess, but like you can just do a study again on the same cohort and repeat the circumstances of the study. That's typically how studies on people work.
Complaint with modern science is that it is fake, and you're proving to me that it's fake. You're not even relying on it. You're relying on a kind of gut intuition, which is really just a half-baked...
Wait, but that's what you were doing. That's what you're doing. You call all the science fake, man. If you're calling all the science fake, you're the one relying on a gut feeling about the world to guide your actions.
Religious sense that a boy can be a girl and that the sun god is going to kill us all in 12 years or whatever AOC said 15 years ago. And, you know, it's really...
I mean, like, he says that in, like, a really dismissive way, but also he literally talked about the Book of the Apocalypse seriously in this talk already. Like, you can't be like, oh yeah, the sun's gonna kill us all. When you seriously brought up a religious text purporting to show the end of the world at the hands of supernatural beings. Like, you can't take the moral high ground on this when you are literally offering no other explanation here. You're just saying the science is fake, but you know what's really trustworthy? This book that says at some point in the future a monster's gonna rise out of the ocean and destroy us all.
Unfortunately, it's not grounded in any serious philosophy or theology or certainly anthropology, but it's also not...
Hey, you know it's not grounded in any serious, you know, any of those things? Giant monsters rising out of the sea to destroy the planet. Like... I just need this.
For a while,
In the 1970s, our town was run by a freaky cult. Every few years, the remaining members predict the world's gonna end, and they have an all-night vigil in the park. Tonight, the followers of reasonableism will be joining together to await the return of Zorp, the giant lizard god who will destroy the earth with his cleansing fire of judgment.
His position is just as founded as the reasonablest position from the hit television show Parks and Rec. That's what he's bringing to the table right now.
Not even grounded in modern science. So even according to your own...
But you don't believe in modern science, Michael. You already established that. That was the main point that this questioner was bringing up.
Stated principles and premises, your arguments don't hold up. And it's not just you. I don't mean to pick on you, but that's true of most of the libs these days, I'm afraid. Sure, you can take one more. I don't mind.
Do cigars give you cancer?
Well, cigars are great. So I got two studies for you. Cigars are great. Do you think that cigars give you cancer? They make it more likely that you'll die of cancer.
I don't know. Ask Rush Limbaugh.
Say it again.
Ask Rush Limbaugh.
Well, people die of cancer. You know, the vast majority of people who die of lung cancer are non-smokers. Like
Most smokers die of lung cancer. Like, how can he lie like this?
Well, people die of cancer. You know, the vast majority of people who die of lung cancer are non-smokers. Like
That's not true. 80 to 90%. Cigarette smoking is responsible to 80 to 90% of all lung cancer cases, making it the top cause of the disease. Those who smoke it are as much as 30 times more likely to get lung cancer than those who don't. You actual dipshit.
Like 80%. But would you say that because you're Mr. Science, would you say that the scientific consensus is that cigars lead to an increased risk of mortality from things like cancer, heart disease, or whatever?
Yes.
Okay. What studies are you going to cite?
Oh, none of them. They're all fake.
None of them. They don't exist. Is the problem. Now, there are two studies.
Wait, I'm sorry, what?
Cancer, heart disease, or whatever.
Yes.
Okay. What studies are you going to cite?
Oh, none of them. They're all fake.
None of them. They don't exist. Is the problem. Now, there are two studies conducted by the American Cancer Society and I think a government agency, but I forget which one, so I won't state it, which came out. Might have been the American Medical Association. Both.
Well, here's the American Lung Association. Just take a look here. Oh, here's a study from 2022. Health effects of premium cigars. Let's see. See, just a lot. Summary and conclusions. This list includes tobacco. So, cigar smoke, including premium cigar smoke, contains many HPHCs capable of causing cancer and multiple other negative health effects. Smokers of premium cigars will be exposed to this toxic and carcinogenic mixture when they use these products. The level of exposure of specific HPHCs in premium cigar users will depend on how the cigars are smoked, including frequency of smoking and depth of inhalation. The overall exposure to HPHCs in daily uses of traditional cigars appears to be similar to daily smokers of non-premium cigars and daily smokers of cigarettes. Biomarker data shows showing equivalent exposure comparing daily traditional cigar and cigarette smokers are based on data from a combination of large and premium cigars, etc., etc., etc. Okay. There's conclusive evidence that smoke from cigars in general, including premium cigar smoke, contains many hazardous and potentially hazardous constituents capable of causing cardiovascular disease, lung disease, cancer, and other types of negative health effects. There is conclusive evidence that the chemical nature of emissions from cigars in general, including premium cigars, are similar to those of cigarette smoke. So, yeah. Let's see. All-cause mortality. Let's see. Several have examined the association of any cigar use, including premium cigars, with all-cause mortality. This section provides an overview of the evidence from epidemiological studies examining risk of all-cause mortality with primary cigar smoking. All but one. Okay. A meta-analysis of studies was not performed in these reviews. Therefore, the results of the individual studies are presented in the chapter annex. All but one study observed increased risk of mortality from 2 to 40%. Notably, findings from a study of 442,455 white male participants in the American Cancer Society Cancer Prevention Study found an 8% increase in all mortality for current primary cigar smokers and a 12% increase in mortality among secondary cigar smokers compared to never smokers. One study, using data from 19,018 Whitehall study participants from the British Civil Service, observed lower mortality rates for current primary cigar smokers compared to never smokers. However, this study included relatively few deaths from primary cigar smokers. Okay. Since these reviews, 4 additional prospective epidemiological studies examining the association of cigar smoking and mortality have been published, including 3. Let's see. The results are largely consistent with those included in the prior reviews and support the conclusion of an increased risk of mortality. Yup. Okay. They followed up with people from a study. Cigar use category includes use of little cigars, blah, 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 blah. 95% confidence interval. Found increased all mortality among current primary cigar smokers compared to never tobacco users. Okay. Yeah, in other news, inhaling smoke into your lungs is bad because they're made for oxygen and not smoke. Okay.
Both tested the health effects of premium cigars, and Mayflower cigars are long filler, all tobacco, premium cigars made at the very finest factory in Esteli, Nicaragua. Thank you very much. So these 2 studies, conducted by people who have no interest in proving that cigars are basically fine in moderation.
Also, cigar and pipe smoking and lung cancer risk, a multi-center study from Europe. Guess what? It found smoking cigars, cigarillos, and pipe tobacco might exert a carcinogenic effect on the lung comparable to that of cigarettes. And, there are so many studies. They
determined that up to as many as 4 cigars per day has no increased risk that is statistically significant with mortality. In fact,
yes, actually, very significant statistical increases if you begin regularly smoking.
One of the studies found that premium cigar smokers who smoke in moderation, meaning fewer than 4 per day, actually live slightly longer than people who don't smoke premium cigars.
I'm sorry, what? Okay. I've smoked cigars before, okay? If you're smoking 4 cigars per day, that is not moderation, okay? Smoking 4 cigars in a day is not moderation whatsoever. Good golly. Also, again, he's just wrong. There's so much documented evidence. Yeah, this goes over extension of chapters on pipes and cigars from the 1973 and 1979 reports by the U.S. Surgeon General. And studies published during the last 2 decades are emphasized. So, like, a lot of the information we have on smoking data comes from, like, the late 70s, or, like, early to late 70s, with studies on tobacco use going back, decades before that. And so it might be hard to find some of these studies to, like, back up the anti-smoking position, because smoking is not good for you. But, like, yeah, you can find it here. Here, the Cancer Prevention Study 1 of the American Cancer Society, conducted between 1959 and 1972, one of the largest prospective cohort studies ever undertaken, following more than 1 million individuals for 12 years. Many results from CPS-1 study have been previously published, but for cigar-related mortality rates, only summary rates from the first 4 years of the follow-up period have been published. The ACS has made this data available for a more detailed analysis. Because of the size of the data set, the detail of smoking behavior information gathered, and the relatively large number of cigar smokers among the subjects, this study provides an opportunity to consider the relationship of number of cigars per day and inhalation to mortality rates from many diseases. Data from CPS-1 was used because of the larger number of cigar smokers in the study in comparison to CPS-2. Let's see. There is a consistent pattern of elevated overall mortality for all groups of smokers, and a dose-response effect for increasing exposure to tobacco smoke is present in the CPS-1 data. The exposure is variously measured as cigars, cigarettes, pipes per day, grams of tobacco per day, lifetime dose in pack years, duration of smoking, etc., and can be further modified by describing the level of inhalation of smoke. In a Swedish prospective mortality study which followed 25,129 men from 1963 through 1979, the all-cause mortality rate for cigar-only smokers was 1.39 compared to never smokers. So 39% higher. The corresponding RR for cigarette smokers only is 1.45. Cigar-only group is based on smoking behavior at the time of the initial survey, thus is a combination of primary and secondary cigar smokers. The authors note no information is available on inhalation patterns of Swedish cigar smokers. Yeah, in a 12-year follow-up study of 46,000 individuals of both sexes in Washington County, Maryland, for pipe/cigar smokers, a RR of all-cause mortality of 1.83 was calculated for men under 50 years of age and 1.13 for men over 50 years of age, providing an overall rate of 1.2. These rates were adjusted for age, housing, quality, etc., etc., etc. So just as an FYI, smoking cigars, if you were under the age of 50, made you 83% more likely to die. That's not great. I might be reading these numbers wrong, but that's a much bigger number than 1.1. 1.8, a lot bigger than 1.1. All right.
So, once again, I think statistics are easily manipulated and often bunk, but the reality is that the people...
Yeah, so exactly what this guy was accusing you of. You don't believe the science because you think that science is, I don't know. I mean, honestly, Michael Knowles would probably think that, like, statistics are a Jewish science. He'd probably even use that term.
People who like to cite statistics usually know far less.
Which, to be clear, is deeply anti-Semitic, but I happen to believe that Michael Knowles is anti-Semitic, so...
...than the people they think they're mocking.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for coming. So, as a Christian, whenever I find myself debating an atheist on the existence of God, often the first arguments I go to are the philosophical, metaphysical arguments, the ontological argument, the cosmological, some of the, Aristotelian arguments. And I get this response, well, philosophy can't prove anything, and I'm taken aback because the metaphysical underlies all of science and empirical measurements.
Also because only philosophy can prove things. So because with deductive reasoning, you can actually come to firm conclusions, but with inductive reasoning, like in modern science, you actually can never come to firm conclusions. So it's kind of ironic that people think that.
Yeah, so often the response I get is you can't prove anything with philosophy, and I respond by pointing out what you just pointed out, that if I am requiring data, I need to be able to assume that the measurements that I'm taking and my senses are reliable, which is a metaphysical conclusion.
Right.
So how
even mathematics is based on axioms.
I mean, I guess it is, but I would just say that in order to exist and function, we need to make assumptions about life, and so there's like a set of necessary assumptions you need to make just in order to get through your day.
That can't be proven, like A equals A or A plus B equals B plus A. So at a certain point, you have to arrive at first principles, or you're just a drooling, babbling baboon like many of these people that I suspect you're talking to.
Precisely. So I guess my question would be, even after those statements of you assume metaphysical conclusions in your daily life, how do you approach these people when discussing the existence of God without going to, because of course you can prove the historicity of the resurrection. I think that's perfect.
Of course. No one would ever doubt that, except for a lot of people. Most serious academics don't believe you can prove the historicity of the resurrection. You can certainly prove that there were groups of people who believed that it was true, but you can't prove that it happened. That's kind of one of the issues here.
Perfectly fine too, but maintaining the basis of philosophy in an age where it seems like people are uneducated on the process of logical reasoning.
You know how I approach them? With saintly patience, that's how. With great endurance and grace. No, I do. I try to be patient because I was that guy. I was an atheist for like 10 years, and this is not false modesty, but I think I'm fairly sloppily educated.
Yeah, you've demonstrated that quite a bit tonight.
I've read a book or two, so I guess that puts me ahead of a lot of PhDs these days. But still, compared to even a middle schooler 70 or 80 years ago, my education is relatively weak. And so the fact that I've had to come to things that third graders used to know and be able to prove pretty well at age 23 means that when I look at someone who doesn't...
I'm sorry, what did third graders know that you are finding difficult now? What that you as a third grader you could prove God exists? What?
Yet have some understanding. I think, well, there but for the grace of God go I. That there I did go for a very long time, and so it's not merely a matter of idle speculation and kind of academic fun that I might convince this person of this thing. It's a matter of his eternal soul. This really matters. It's not an ivory tower tea party. We're living real life here, and no one here gets out alive in this temporal world, and so we gotta come to real conclusions. There's a real spiritual warfare that goes on. So that's how I try to approach it. Because I think, even when someone has all sorts of wrong answers, I think you're still further along than I was 10 years ago.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I want to preface this by saying that I'm Catholic, and I do believe abortion is wrong. But
what's this but? I like it so far.
I still think that it's good to be charitable and to challenge intellectually challenged arguments. So I'm going to try to make the best possible case for the permissibility of abortion.
Sure.
I'm going to use a thought experiment. For the thought experiment, I'm going to assume that the fetus in the womb is just as much as a person with the same amount of rights as, say, an 8-year-old child or any living adult.
Mm-hmm.
In this thought experiment, we can imagine a mother and her 8-year-old child.
Oh,
and
boy.
the 8-year-old child has a form of complications such that he needs a kidney. And the mother's the only person who has a kidney that would suffice to help the child live. If the child does not get this kidney, he will die. Does the mother have a moral obligation to donate her kidney to the child? If yes, should we make a law enforcing this? If no, then why is it different in the case of abortion where the woman's body is being used unwillingly, unwantedly?
Yeah. Good question. A woman does not have a moral obligation necessarily, though one would imagine that justice and, or rather that charity and orders of charity, meaning that we owe more to our children than we do to some stranger down the street.
This is a fascinating answer from Michael Knowles. I'm willing to bet it's because, like, the caveat at the end that there would be legislation around enforcing this type of choice. But it's really interesting that he immediately backs off the argument that a woman's body should be used even against her will to keep a baby alive, a child alive. But he immediately revokes that if that entity is inside her body. That's so fascinating.
Street, we owe more to our country than we do to someone else's country. One would hope that charity and the order of charity would impel the mother to give the child her kidney, which she doesn't even need and which will help the child to live. But it would not be morally obligatory, in my layman's perspective, because her kidney is for her. So things are for other things, and the way that we know the nature of things.
Her kidney's for her, then surely her body is for her, Michael? Like, the barest extension of your logic to the scenario of abortion would also indicate that her body is for her, Michael?
Is largely by what they're for. You know, my eye is for seeing, my Mayflower cigar is for smoking, my microphone is to bring my mellifluous tones to your ears, and her kidney is for cleaning her blood. Now, the reason that it's different in the case of, say, abortion, you know, well, if she doesn't have to give the kid her kidney, why does she have to at least rent the kid her womb? You know, why does she have to at least allow the child use of her womb?
Well, okay, but wait. Flawed reasoning right here. It's not just the use of the womb. When you're pregnant, it's the use of every other part of you. Like, the rest of your entire body undergoes changes in order to keep that thing inside of you alive. Like, your kidneys work harder, your organs work harder, everything squishes and sloshes around. You know, like, it's a whole thing. So it's not just the womb, you're using your entire body, you know, a significant portion of the food you take in, you know, your altered brain chemistry. Yeah, absolutely catastrophic effects on the body, especially if they are unwanted changes.
Is because her womb is for gestating children. That's what it's for. That's why the womb is different than a lung or an eyeball or a kidney or anything else. That's what it's for. The woman's biology is ordered toward, in principle, having a child, and that's why it's so unnatural and so profoundly wicked for a mother to kill her own child, and because the social effects of that are great too.
Okay, but the fundamental reason that you're arguing here is just that you believe that God formed the female body in order to give birth, and that it is wicked to reject that mission given to female folks by God. But my question here is, why does that give you the right to take away other women's body autonomy? Like, why? Like, sure, you believe that, but other people don't believe that. Why should people who don't believe what you believe be forced to do what you believe? Like, you're not offering an explanation. Like, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in, like, a creator that meticulously formed the human body with express purposes for different organs and whatnot, and you believe that our form happens to arise out of the chaos of, the universe and the evolutionary forces that surround us, then, there's really no reason at all to go along with Michael Knowles' line of reasoning here. It is entirely centered on, something made you with a purpose, and if you got that part in there, and if you don't want to use it, then sucks to suck. And that's really it. Like, okay, you made it for a purpose, but that doesn't mean you have to use it for that purpose. I don't know, eyes are for seeing, but you can close your eyes, right? You can cover them, you can shut them, you can turn your brain off for 8 hours a night. You can do a lot of things with them, as you will. And it turns out some people would will that their uterus not be used for a baby just at that particular moment or ever. And I think that's totally fine. And your response to that seems to just be, well, it's made to do that, though. And it's like, okay, but I don't know, your knee is made breakable. Like, you can break your leg. Does that mean that was a good use of your body? No.
Beyond the specific act of evil, as Mother Teresa pointed out in her UN acceptance speech, she said, abortion is the greatest evil in the world, because if a mother can kill her own child, there's nothing that we won't do one to another. Very good question.
But there's already nothing we won't do to one another. That's the thing, Michael. We live in a world where all the violence is on the table at any given time. That's the world we live in right now.
Sometimes I wish the elderly would just die.
And so, when you say, well, if you do abortion, that means all the evils are on the table. Which ones are off the table right now, Michael? Just curious.
Stand on the T.
Hello. Thank you for coming, Michael. So,
well, yes. Also, Renafi, his worldview also does dictate that any woman with a uterus that cannot conceive is in some way like a failure to God. It's pretty disgusting, no matter how you slice it.
Conservatives are against the ideology of political correctness and social justice, which is the ideology that says that white people should hate their culture and that Asians and whites should be treated worse than blacks and Hispanics. So that same ideology said it was okay for Zionists to throw Palestinians off their homeland and deny Palestinians the right to live in their homeland.
I don't know if it was the same ideology. It was
this dude's so nervous. I feel sorry for him.
It was the ideology of Zionism, is what you're saying.
It's
which is different
that's
than
the reason
political
why
correctness.
that's the reason why the whole world supported it. They condemned apartheid South Africa because it was white people doing it, but they don't condemn it when it's Jews doing it because they're considered more oppressed.
Everybody condemns Israel. What are you talking about? We're like the only country in the world
What?
that doesn't condemn Israel.
We give them more money than any other country in the
Right,
world.
we do, but I'm saying
yes, and
most
other
countries,
other
including in the
countries,
West,
other countries do too. But we sanction apartheid South Africa because it's white people doing it.
The Jews
This guy's crazy and making me feel uncomfortable.
are pretty white. I mean, some of them are a little dusky, but some are pretty white. So, what is your question? Are you saying that Zionism is the same thing as political correctness?
Yes, I believe that conservatives shouldn't support Israel because it's the
Well, I know
same
what you
ideology.
believe. I'm trying to figure out what your question is.
Because it's the same ideology as political correctness that says that white people should hate their culture and that
I get the feeling that this guy's like just a severely mentally ill Nazi. That's what I'm picking up here.
white people and Asians should be treated worse. It's denying an indigenous population the right to live in their homeland.
We found the median Michael Knowles fan. True.
Imagine if people took it a step further and said that Native Americans and black people should throw white people out of their homeland because of political correctness.
Wait, hold on. Hold on. At first you said that Zionism denies the indigenous people the right to their homeland.
Because
so
of
in
the,
that
because of
instance,
the Holocaust.
But in the first thing you said, the Palestinian Arabs would be the indigenous people who now have the right to throw the occupying Jews out of what is the Palestinian Arabs' homeland.
I support
a
state.
Hold on one second. I'm trying to make some sense of what you're saying. I'm trying to just make some sense of the things.
Yeah, no, he's a Nazi. Like he's any of these people who advocate for ethno-states are always like, yeah, we should have a nation of our own, but I don't support violence of any kind. You know, we'll just somehow get millions of people who have a different skin color from us to move to a different place. Haha. No violence.
Interesting. Because then the second part, you said, imagine if the Lakota Sioux, say, tried to throw the white Americans out of America because it was their indigenous homeland. But that is the argument you're advocating, actually, right? By opposing Zionism on indigenous grounds, that's the same argument.
What I'm saying is that people can do different things based on how oppressed they are. If white people did what the Jews did in 1948, they would be condemned by a long shot.
You're saying if white...
Yeah, no, this guy's a Nazi, guys. Wait, we are listening to a raving, scared Nazi that it sounds like he just shit himself. Like he farted and shitted. Okay, because like he's trying to say if white people did what the Jews did in 1948, oh man, like yeah, no, this is. Is that some Holocaust apologia? Yep.
White people went into some land that they hadn't been in a long time?
If white people went to a country and threw out a population, they would be...
We've done that, haven't
we? That was...
I mean, we try to be nice to the people, but, that's happened. Wars of conquest happen.
1948 was different than the 1600s.
How so?
Well, 1600s, it was okay to conquer other countries.
What changed about practical morality?
In the 1940s, there was the UN. It made clear that conquering other countries were not acceptable.
But how did that change the moral law? Just because the UN said so?
So
if I say so, can I change the moral law?
The only reason that people supported Israel was because of the Holocaust.
Okay, you keep like speaking quickly and changing all the topics and interrupting
me.
I'm trying to figure out what you're asking.
We've actually hit a point where I feel bad for Michael Knowles because I don't really know that there's a good way to handle this. I take it back. I don't feel bad for Michael Knowles. He's a bad person, and I only wish bad things upon him. So, this is actually kind of fun to see him squirm when faced with the inevitable consequences of his terrible politics. So, you know what?
Asking because a lot of people have questions about Zionism and Israel. That was what our whole speech was about holy war, not just with the Jews and the Muslims, but with Christians as well. What's the question?
My question is, as a conservative that believes that all people should be judged equally, Why do you support Israel and condemn? And why do you support Israel when you're against political correctness and social justice?
Well, because I don't see why I shouldn't, as a practical matter, support Israel. You bring up the notion of Zionism, and Zionism has a religious aspect and a historical aspect. The historical aspect is exactly the kind of argument you're making about the Native American Indians, that because the Jews lived in this land a long time ago, they have a right to it now. But I don't really buy indigenous arguments. I don't buy it for the Lakota Sioux. I don't really buy it for anybody. However, I pointed out in my speech, if you were in favor of the Palestinian Arabs having a state, you probably wouldn't want to make the indigenous arguments because Palestinian Arabs are not indigenous to the land by any stretch. They invaded in the 7th century and conquered.
Yeah, they've only been there for 1,300 years. Like you know you're on flimsy ground when you can trace back a family lineage 1,300 years in a given area, and he's trying to argue that that is not a sufficient amount of time to create an indigenous group of people.
Many lands that were actually controlled by Christians. So that I don't think that argument works. Then there's a religious argument to Zionism, which says that the Jews have a right from God to this land.
True. The correct way to handle this, Mix Vivian, is exactly how you describe. Fuck off, you Nazi shit cunt. Exactly.
And as a Christian, one's view of what is meant by Israel and what is meant by the Holy Land and the fulfillment of the old law and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, Michael Knowles is up there saying the quiet part out loud, which is that he supports the state of Israel because he believes it will bring about the end of days. He believes that by supporting Israel, it will bring about the apocalypse and, by extension, wipe out all of the Jews, which is something he's actually in favor of, given that he is adopting this particular flavor of religiosity.
Would impel a Christian not to totally agree with that point of view. So I'm not saying that I agree in principle with either of those arguments. But as a practical matter, it just seems to me that the state of Israel is doing pretty good stuff with the land. And so what I really care about from the perspective of...
I mean, when he says this, what he means is he thinks that it is good that the state of Israel is pushing Muslims off of land. Like, he supports that full stop.
The Holy Land is that the holy sites are protected, that Christians are permitted to go on pilgrimage there. And when I look at the alternative, which is a bunch of Palestinian Arabs who elected Hamas, and I look at the history of Christian-Muslim relations, which has basically been a 1,400-year unimpeded story of Muslims trying to invade all of Western Christendom.
Yeah, ignore the 9 Crusades.
Desecrate our churches and abuse our relics and so on and so forth, then I'm not really inclined to create yet another particularly radical Muslim nation, particularly with authority over the holy sites. So you can call it Zionism. I wouldn't call it Zionism. Just call it a kind of practical and prudential support for the state of Israel.
Yeah, a practical Zionism, I guess.
Given the alternative. And then you make this claim that...
He's literally saying, like, well, I think the state of Israel is good because it means there are less Muslims there. like, this man really is, like, evil, you know? Like, he really is like a demon in a skin suit.
Political correctness is identical with Zionism. I mean, it just isn't. I don't know what to say. Zionism is a philosophy that came out of the 19th century that made all these claims about the Jews' rights to the Holy Land.
Ah, yes, a nice practical ethnic cleansing. That's the kind of thing Michael Knowles loves.
Political correctness is a liberal ideology that emerges in the 20th century, which we now call wokeness or whatever, which has all sorts of influences from the Western Marxist tradition to the, the deconstructionists and the post-structuralists and all sorts of kind of postmodern academic theories. And it's nasty and silly and wrong, but I don't really see the connection between the two things. And just as a practical matter, I'm yet to be convinced that handing over the Holy Sepulchre to a bunch of fanatical Islamists would be a good idea. I don't think it was a good idea in the 11th century or the 12th century or the 13th century, and I don't think that it's a good idea in the 21st. We let you get a lot of, I wouldn't say questions in, but sort of fragments of sentences in, so we do have to get to more questions. If there's time at the end, though, I'm happy to hear more verbal ejaculations, if you like.
Michael, why on earth would you use that phrasing? Why? Why would you do that? Why would you do that, though?
If there's time at the end, though, I'm happy to hear more verbal ejaculations, if you like.
Cool. Jail. Straight to jail. Send him to jail.
That was actually going to be our last question.
No, you've got to look. This is a very put-together person here who we should have one more.
All right, we can do one more.
All right.
Hello, Michael. I just want to say first that I love your Mayflower cigars, and
you're a man of excellent taste, I can tell.
I actually run your Mayflower cigars Instagram, Mayflower.
Is it you?
I gotta say, having this insight into the conservative, the young conservative men who are, bolstering Michael Knowles' celebrity. I'm not impressed. I don't think they're sending their best. I just...
I was wondering who did it, because it's not us. It's not internal. You're doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
You're hired for exactly the rate that we've been paying you up until this point.
My question was your opinion on the Daily Wire's decision to Candace Owens and her opinions of Israel.
Why did I agree to take one more question? I don't know. Well, I basically think the same thing I've thought the whole time, which is, I am good friends with Candace Owens and with her family. I'm the godfather to Candace's daughter.
Oh my God, what? Oh my God. Candace Owens trusted this ghoul with her her daughter? Are you kidding me? I wouldn't leave I wouldn't leave a daughter of any age in any amount of proximity to Michael Knowles.
And also extremely close friends with the guys who, founded and run Daily Wire. I've been friends with them since before the Daily Wire existed.
The guys? You mean Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring?
So I guess all I'll say on it, while in charity restraining from, spilling tea or telling tales out of school or whatever, which would be unbecoming, is there are all sorts of theories that crop up about nasty, ill motivations, and it's really lunatic ideological things from people who love the Daily Wire and they don't like Candace, or they love Candace and they hate the Daily Wire, whatever. And I would say I don't find those wild and passionate theories to be convincing as someone who is rather close to everyone involved in the matter. So it's a pity when friends, bicker, and that's especially true when it occurs on a national or international stage. It isn't the first time that this sort of thing has happened in media or political organizations, and I think that people ought to be permitted to part company in a way that does not besmirch the character of anyone involved, or lead people to be extraordinarily partisan on either side. People have good faculties of reason. They can judge things for themselves, and I certainly don't think friends ought to ever gossip and spill tea behind anyone's back. Certainly not on the campus of UC Berkeley. No way, man. Wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
I think he genuinely got uncomfortable at that question.
A true pleasure. Thank you. See you next time. I'll try not to step over any drug addicts on my way out of town. See you later. Thanks.
Wow. So I'm still not over his offer to let this room full of college students verbally ejaculate all over him. You know, I'm still not over him telling a room full of college students that he wants them to ejaculate verbally on him. I'm also still not over that he thinks smoking 4 cigars a day is a moderation of using cigars. I don't like that's not a moderate use of cigars. That's a heavy usage of cigars. Goodness. So I think we learned that Michael Knowles' history degree is actually quite bad, quite poorly implemented here. He does not seem to have a good grasp on the Crusades or science or why it's not a good idea to inhale smoke into your lungs. You know, actually, that's an excellent point right there. Yeah, he talked a lot about what uteruses are made for, what kidneys are made for. He didn't really talk a whole lot about what lungs are made for. And it's curious because notably lungs are not made for inhaling smoke. They're made to inhale air. That's the thing that keeps you alive, not the smoke. Let's see. I feel like there's a great deal missing from the coverage of this election from the POV of Harris supporters. In what sense? Like how the Democrats themselves aren't running a particularly effective election? Well, yeah. I mean, I talked about that at length earlier today. I've been going for 7.5 hours. But generally speaking, how do I put this? I think it is more valuable for me to debunk conservative propaganda in a lot of cases than to, like, get into it with folks like Jill Stein supporters. Does that make sense? Mostly because, like, it's really disheartening for me. I get really frustrated with how Democrats handle their campaigns because primarily Democrat campaigns inevitably for like the Congress or the presidency inevitably widen out what their messaging is intended for. And so it's very, very frustrating to do a segment about how like Kamala Harris is trying to communicate in an election year. And a lot of people just don't really understand. And you can say it as many times as you want, but a lot of people just don't get that fundamentally a lot of messaging from a campaign, any given campaign, is not going to be intended for them. It's going to be intended for other people. And a lot of people get angry when they see campaign messaging that is not intended for them and does not serve them. And it's frustrating and anger inducing. And like, I get it. It's also just one of those bitter pills that like, yeah, sometimes we need to reach out to folks outside of your ideological demographic, you know? And it's frustrating for me because I'd love all of the candidates to run socialist campaigns, but you know they're not going to do that. There's something to be said for the fact that people have been criticizing them for ignoring their base for months now. Well, yeah, and I did talk about that earlier today, but like to kind of reiterate my points, like they're going for a strategy that is aiming squarely at white non-college voters, specifically to peel off that demographic, because there is a pretty established trend over the last 8 years that Donald Trump has lost about 6% of his support in that particular demographic, which is, if you can peel off another 1 or 2% before the election day, that basically destroys any chance of him winning a general election. Like that demographic block is so large compared to all of the others that if you can peel 1 or 2% off, that's basically the death knell of the Republican Party. So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to do a low-risk campaign that is assuming that a lot of the base is already locked up, and they're going for the jugular of the white non-college voter, which definitely has a good shot at working, but is devastating when it comes to, like, you know, the enthusiasm of the base. And at the end of the day, we kind of have to realize that, like, the people who are running Kamala Harris's campaign are largely a lot of the same people that were running Joe Biden's campaign, and they're not. What they're doing is going for this much more moderate conservative approach that really doesn't risk all that much rhetorically. Like, it doesn't put Kamala Harris in the position of making promises that she's going to later feel like she has to fulfill. To more left-leaning and energized movement, and that's deeply unfortunate for us, you know, for the sake of building leftist power. And, you know, part of it is a bit inevitable because, like, the campaign infrastructure was kind of already baked in, and making those big changes, you know, a month or two out from the election is a pretty big risk. So I think a lot of what's been going on has been trying to mitigate risk and taking the safest options. And I think, honestly, when it comes to taking the safest options, they really don't want to roll the dice on, you know, an energized youth vote turnout. Because in a general political term, like, that's a fairly large risk. And I think it would work if she kept up more left-leaning rhetoric and making those left-leaning promises, you know, attaching herself to a ceasefire or, like, arms embargo. Like, things like that would absolutely energize the base, but that base is so small, or not even, sorry, when I say the base, I mean, like, the base of leftist voters. Because the wider Democratic base, like, wants a ceasefire, but isn't necessarily, like, engaged on that topic. They're more engaged on a lot of the stuff that the campaign has currently been messaging on. There's not much they could have changed, but I also feel like they could more explicitly share the message. Protecting the status quo has to be good enough sometimes. Well, yeah, but, like, that's the thing, right? Like, that is the message that they've been putting out, but they don't, like phrasing it in that blunt way is not an effective campaign strategy either. You know, like, there's not really room for them via official communications to, like, put a hand on the shoulder of, like, the left-leaning communities online and be like, hey, bud, listen, we know a lot of this isn't for you, but sometimes we got to do things we don't like in order to prevent the rise of fascism. You know, like, they can't necessarily do that because that's not energizing communication. That's not an energizing communication strategy. Rather, instead, they're looking at, you know, economics, the border stuff. They're looking at the endorsements from Republicans, and they're basically saying, we are going to put our foot on the gas pedal of what we believe is resonating with these white non-college voters. And if we can peel off 1 or 2%, that basically seals the deal of the election in our favor. We can lose the support of a lot of these farther left groups that are saying they're going to vote for Jill Stein no matter what, and we can write them off. We will lose their support, but we will win the election. And like that's ultimately where they're putting their money. You know, that's like I think it is the fundamental reason why the Democrats are putting a ground game in a big way in Florida. Yeah. Do you think there's a better chance of that than peeling off the 1 or 2% who would vote for Stein or West? Yeah, I do. Jill is a wasted vote. Yep. Yeah, because again, we did some back of the napkin math earlier. But like around 40% of the general electorate fall into the category of white and not like non-college. And if you translate that into how many people voted in the last election, like it's like 61 million. And that's 61 million people who voted in the last election. If you peel off 1 or 2%, if you peel off 1% of that, that's over 600,000 voters. If you peel off 2 additional percent, that's 1.2 million voters. And that isn't even voters that need to like shift from Donald Trump to Kamala Harris. If they just don't show up, Donald Trump is dead in the water, you know? And that's really a much larger gamble than like, I don't know, how many people voted for Jill Stein last time around? Let's see. Da-da-da. Yeah, third-party candidates picked up like 1.8% of the votes. So like 2 million total. Like I just think that the main strategy is there, and I understand like the electoral sense of it, but it's like it's disappointing and disheartening, you know? I will say I was told by a Stein voter that nothing I could say would change their mind, so there you go. Well, that's the thing, Nate Bookout. Like, campaign strategists look at the rhetoric coming out of a lot of these like third-party voters, and they're basically being told to go fuck themselves, and they're like, well, you know, I don't think we can win them over. You know, so let's win over these people who are more on the edge. You know, Donald Trump has lost, 6 to 8% of support from this key demographic that he needs in order to win. If we can accelerate that just a bit more, because keep in mind, he's already lost 3% from 2020 to today, which represents, if we use just 2020 numbers, a loss of like almost 2 million votes, which, given that the margins were so thin in 2020, like, if you can peel off an additional 2 million votes or 1.2 million votes, like that's going to be significant. It's really sad people are willing to gamble the future of the country on being stubborn. Well, yeah, I mean, it's I gotta be honest, like, a lot of it is that they just don't believe they don't believe it can get worse. They don't believe it can get worse. Will Jill take votes away from Trump? Maybe. Not a lot, though. Well, I do agree it does have the stink of blaming a cultural aspect of the youth rather than pointing fingers at the systemic issues. Well, I mean, that part of the issue here is that, like, we're in a systemic, let me put it this way, we're between a systemic rock and a systemic hard place. You know, like, this current election cycle is either we get fascism or we get neoliberalism, and neither of those are going to appeal to the youth, because the youth want to actually fix things. You know, the youth see something is broken and they want to fix it, and as they should. But part of the problem is our system doesn't allow for a fix to happen. You know, like, it's not, or at least not right now. And so it's less cultural, a cultural aspect of the youth, and more just that, like, for a lot of them, this is their first election, and they know a lot is riding on it, and they want to do right. And the frustrating part about reality is that currently doing the right thing for all people involved is not really an option that we have the luxury of taking, you know? They'll find out if the worst case happens. I mean, they will, but that's not really a comfort to me.